Welcome to Monster Hunter Evolution Volume 1. This supercut contains the first 13 episodes of my Evolution series, where I go over the movesets of certain monsters and how they've changed across the series, from the early games all the way to Monster Hunter World and Rise. I've also added the Sunbreak changes for monsters that appeared in the expansion. For those of you who don't feel like rewatching all episodes for the Sunbreak changes, there's a separate video where I go over them back to back. Rathalos was introduced in the very first Monster Hunter. He is the flagship monster of that game, as well as the entire series. Rathalos is one of two monsters that have been in every game since, and he's had quite a few changes and variations over the years. Rathalos' overall moveset in the first game was simple but effective. In terms of physical attacks, he could bite at the hunter, charge at them, or perform a great dive. He also likes to swing his tail around. He is known for being able to shoot fireballs too, either grounded or from the sky. One of his favourite attacks is to shoot a fireball while flying backwards. Rathalos also has poisonous claws that he uses to attack with from the sky. Another very infamous attack has been dubbed by fans as the Rathalos World Tour, where he flies around the area for an extended period of time, occasionally ending with an attack. The Monster Hunter 1 expansion, Monster Hunter G, featured two Rathalos variations, Azure Rathalos, a subspecies, and Silver Rathalos, a rare species. Azure tends to have higher attack power and strike from the sky much more often, while Silver Rathalos can attack at an extremely fast rate. All three Rathaloses appeared in Monster Hunter Portable, DOS, and Freedom Unite. However, upon the release of Monster Hunter Tri, only Rathalos was present among them. In this game he received a major redesign. His talons, wings, tail, and overall head shape were massively altered, and he is much brighter in colour too. In terms of moveset, he gains and loses attacks. This game introduced elemental blights, so now his fireballs will actually burn you. His old dive attack now has him glide at you while airborne, which he can land from or continue flying. When in the air, Rathalos can also perform new claw attacks, including a brand new pin. In general, he is very good at manoeuvring through the sky, frequently repositioning himself to get a better shot at you. A major weakness he received is that he can now become exhausted, something new to this game. When this happens, he will often stand still and pant, and his attacks become slower and more feeble. He will try and fail to shoot fireballs as well. Silver Rathalos made his return in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. He has Rathalos' new design and new attacks, as well as the ability to shoot potent fireballs that cause huge explosions. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate brought back the Azure Rathalos as well. Azure can perform claw attacks without having to land, as well as some advanced fire attacks. He is much more adept in the air than he was before. In G rank, Silver Rathalos' head is now incredibly tough, deflecting all attacks. He can perform a fiery bite attack and move much faster than Azure and the base form. It's also worth mentioning that they can all still perform their world tour. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate features all three Rathaloses. They're not too different to the previous game, but there are some changes here and there. Rathalos gains one of Azure's claw attacks, and the latter can combo aerial attacks much more. Silver's head isn't as hard as it was before, but he has even more enhanced fire attacks, as well as better combo abilities. The Rathalos World Tour isn't in this game, except for certain areas. This time Rathalos will shoot fireballs while flying around the arena. Monster Hunter Generations includes Rathalos and Silver Rathalos, but not Azure, whose exclusive attacks were given to the base form. Silver Rathalos is identical to how he was in 4 Ultimate. This game introduces a new Rathalos variation, the Deviant Dread King Rathalos. Design-wise, Dread King boasts a darker colour scheme, a new wing pattern, larger wing spikes, a different face, and larger dorsal spikes. Moveset-wise, he has several new tricks. His talons can inflict a more potent poison, his fireballs are bigger and result in large explosions upon impact, and he can even launch a molten chunk of rock that will cause a large explosion. He can also do a new bite attack, where he bites from side to side 2 times, 3 when enraged, which will inflict you with fire blight upon impact. Dread King is challenging enough already, but you also cannot flash bomb him out of the sky unless his wings are broken, which makes dealing with his constant flights much harder than regular Rathalos. In later Deviant quests, he can fire 3 molten chunks that explode like the larger one. The next game in the series is World, which Rathalos naturally reappears in. He is much more detailed than ever before, and his colours are a bit muted. He retains most if not all of his attacks from 4 Ultimate, with some new additions and changes. He can breathe fire in an arc on the ground, hurting anyone at close range. He can swing his tail at hunters mid-air too. He also keeps the attacks he gained from Azor in Generations, like the advanced claw attacks. Rathalos is much more mobile in the air this time, which can make dealing with his new speed and attacks pretty hard, such as this one attack where he attempts to sideswipe you. He can also create powerful fireballs that explode upon impact. Azor Rathalos in this game has the same new additions, but also his own tricks. He is much better at chaining aerial attacks together than Rathalos, who only reaches that level of danger when enraged. Azor also has access to even stronger fireballs. In Iceborne, Rathalos can shoot 3 fireballs while airborne, which he couldn't previously do. Azor Rathalos becomes faster and has even bigger fireballs. Silver Rathalos was brought in with the Iceborne expansion. Like Azor, he keeps many of the changes World made to Rathalos. However, Iceborne Silver is probably the most distinct he's ever been. He gains Dread King's Firebite attack, as well as this new 360-degree tailspin. At certain intervals of the fight, his chest glows red and blue as he enters a new state, called the Hellfire state. While he glows, his flames become much more potent, leaving deadly after trails that do significant damage. His combos are increased, and he gains a couple of new fire attacks. This state is incredibly deadly, but can be stopped if you deal enough damage to his head. Speaking of, you won't bounce off it with white sharpness and above anymore, but it's still not a weak point until you break it. The next game is Monster Hunter Rise. Rathalos keeps many attacks from his world counterparts, including the fire bite that was given to Silver, but he's quite a bit different in that he tends to spend as much time on the ground as in the air. He has many ground attacks as well as aerial attacks, but there are also aerial attacks designed to bring him down to the ground. Azor Rathalos is not in this game, and it seems like once again they enhanced the base form to be more like him, with fast aerial attacks and combos. One major new addition is this flamethrower attack. Similar to the arc breath attack in World, Rathalos will fire it upwards at you. Rise also has the Apex Rathalos, one that survived the storms of Wind Serpent Ibushi and was permanently altered by it, now having many scars. He has several new fire attacks, such as this close range fire explosion. When enraged, his chest glows like the Iceborne Silver Rathalos, giving him access to a deadly fire combo where he uses a flamethrower arc attack, followed by 2 carpet bomb fireballs. His explosion is followed up with a shotgun blast, and he can double up his flamethrower attack. He is capable of launching a molten rock similar to Dread King, although this one explodes much faster and descends down from the sky. Sunbreak Rathalos' big new addition is an attack where he breathes a stream of fire in the air. He can often combo this from a fireball and into a homing claw attack. Silver Rathalos was reintroduced in Tyson Update 1, initially encountered in the Forlorn Arena, but available to fight in the same locations as Rathalos. He has many of Rathalos' new attacks, such as the straight laser. Silver tends to combo attacks together at a much higher rate. He has a new attack where he rapidly shoots 3 fireballs, similar to Rathian. In Iceborne, Silver Rathalos and Gold Rathian's enhanced fire state was referred to as the Hellfire state. In Sunbreak, it was changed to Incandescent, most likely to avoid confusion with Magna Marlowe's flames. In his incandescent state, his fire is different to how it used to be in Iceborne, no longer lingering on the ground for nearly as long. He uses a lot of Rise Rathalos' attacks in different ways. For example, his straight laser on the ground can be followed up with another at a different angle. He has access to Apex Rathalos' carpet bombs too. He tends to combo from and into claw attacks, often ending in a powerful fire blast. Silver also has a special attack where he breathes fiery chunks on the ground and sets them alight in a huge explosion. Tigrex was introduced in Monster Hunter Freedom 2 as the flagship monster of the game. He is a flying wyvern, but different from the others in that he uses his wing arms to move around on the ground. When attacking, Tigrex likes to charge, a lot. It's pretty much his signature move. His powerful wing arms allow him to cover great distances at an impressive speed, which he uses to chase down prey. Sometimes Tigrex will charge and turn around into another charge, forcing you to be extra vigilant when attempting to counter him. He will often dash forward slightly with a double bite attack, and can use his wing arms to sling rocks at you. Sometimes he will perform a great dive or spin in place. In a way, his moveset feels like an upgraded version of the other flying wyvern's ground attacks. Tigrex can charge better, bite better, dive better, and unlike the other flying wyverns, he can spin attack in a complete 360 degrees. Tigrex does not have projectiles like Rathalos, but he knows how to create his own with the rock throw. The biggest difference between Tigrex and all the other flying wyverns is that he can't really do much in the air. He will flap his wings to move from area to area, but he cannot engage in aerial combat like Rathalos, and that is the trade-off Tigrex takes by having better ground abilities. While he skipped Monster Hunter Try, he did appear in Portable Third. He retains all his Freedom 2 attacks, with the hitboxes cleaned up a bit. A major new addition is this new combo, where he runs forward into a moving spin attack. Tigrex is affected by the new stamina system introduced in the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter. When exhausted, he will stand still and pant, and his attacks become slower and more feeble. Sometimes he will turn around from a charge attack, only to fall over in a comical fashion, giving you a free attack opportunity. Tigrex has a subspecies in this game, the Brute Tigrex. He is predominantly black and often slightly bigger. While Tigrex's signature move is his charging, Brute likes to roar. A lot. He is adapted differently to regular Tigrex, in that his roars are much stronger and can damage the hunter. Tigrex has 2 roars, one where his head is lower, and another where he stands upright and deals significant damage while knocking you away. This is the roar Brute Tigrex specializes in. He can perform an upright stampede that ends in an enhanced roar, but when enraged, he can also charge normally, only to back up and quickly unleash an even stronger roar. They're both powerful, but have very limited range. Biologically, this implies that in order for Tigrex to create a noise this loud, he has to be standing upright, and Brute Tigrex has simply evolved to optimize it further, being able to use it in combat after charging. In any case, it makes him much more dangerous. While Tigrex likes to hang out in a wide variety of environments, Brute mainly stays in volcanoes, forests and deserts, keeping away from the tundra. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate did not feature Tigrex or his subspecies, but they were both included in Monster Hunter 4. The main addition Tigrex received was this turnaround charge. Normally when a monster performs an attack, they turn around at 60-degree angles to face you. This gives you enough time to heal, sharpen, or even quickly attack. But with Tigrex peeking around and initiating a charge, that opportunity is robbed from you, and so you have to be a bit more aware when fighting him. Brute Tigrex also has the turnaround, but instead of charging, he slings rocks at you. He will use his upright charge much more often than before. He will also use his powerful roar without charging. Brute Tigrex is not the only Tigrex variation in Monster Hunter 4, as it also introduced the Molten Tigrex. Molten Tigrex is a rare species, and can be encountered exclusively in the tower. He has a blood red colour scheme and is much larger in size. The fight starts off slow. Molten attacks using basic bites, maybe a spin here and there, but largely he just stays in one place. But as the fight goes on, he starts using more and more attacks and eventually becomes faster and stronger, incorporating more of Tigrex's and Brute's attacks into his moveset. Eventually, he will even enter a second rage state, becoming even more dangerous. Sometimes he will perform Brute Tigrex's roar and immediately follow up with another, potentially catching hunters off guard who may have thought he had already finished his attack. If Molten's claws hit you in any of his attacks, you will be inflicted with Blast Blight. His immense size makes him very dangerous in a limited space of the tower, as you often find yourself cornered against him. He is even capable of charging 4 times in a row, and many of his attacks spread blast powder across the arena. However, after his second rage state ends, he is guaranteed to be exhausted. In G rank, Tigrex can perform the turnaround rock sling in addition to the charge. Brute Tigrex has more additions. He can perform his super roar without charging, turn around into a charge as well as roar back to back, and when frenzied, can charge up to 4 times in a row. Molten Tigrex is faster in G rank and is no longer guaranteed to be exhausted after his second rage state. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate features Apex Tigrex, a monster strong enough to overcome the Frenzy virus. He is much faster, your attacks bounce off him very easily, and he incorporates attacks from Brute Tigrex. Monster Hunter Generations brought back Tigrex, who is identical to his 4 Ultimate version. Brute and Molten are absent, but a deviant was introduced, Grimclaw Tigrex. This Tigrex is much more blue than the normal one, and his claws are larger. True to his name, his claw attacks are much stronger than normal. His rock throw is different from regular Tigrex, as the projectile rolls along the ground. Grimclaw will also slam his claws into the ground, causing explosions. He has Brute Tigrex's upright charge as well as his roars, but he also performs Molten Tigrex's fake out roar. When performing the upright charge, he will slam his arm into the ground and create an explosion. In later Deviant quests, he can create extended steam explosions with his claws that travel along the ground. His rock attack now has them split into 3 as well. Tigrex skipped Monster Hunter World, but was brought back to Iceborne. Aside from looking very detailed and high definition, he also has a brand new theme and several changes. For one, he does not fly anymore. To move between areas, he will simply walk. Secondly, Tigrex's old walk animation has been changed. Previously, he would walk with his front legs raised above the ground slightly, meaning he was being supported entirely by his back. It was incredibly unnatural, and a result of Tigrex reusing the walk animation of other flying wyverns. This was changed so that now his front legs are on the ground at all times. When Tigrex initiates a charge, he will rear back and open his jaw before leaping forward, letting the player know what is about to happen. At the end of his triple charge combo, Tigrex will sometimes immediately perform a spin attack, which makes him unpredictable and harder to punish. He also gains an attack where he swipes his arm around to the side to catch players who are right next to him. Brute Tigrex is unlocked in the post-game. He retains most if not all of Tigrex's changes and attacks, as well as some new ones of his own. Like in old games, he will perform large roars as part of attacks, but in Iceborne these can often follow smaller roars he performs quickly. Sometimes he will chain multiple small roars together, followed by a giant roar. He received a different swipe attack where he slams his wing arm into the ground before swiping his arm, slightly reminiscent of Grimclaw. He also gets a giant roar laser, because why not? Tigrex once again appears in Monster Hunter Rise, completely on his own, no Molten or even Brute this time. The major difference with Tigrex is that he's been downgraded from Master to high rank, so some of his attacks have been reduced. The spin attack he does after charging is a bit more telegraphed, and he's slightly slower in general. He is also missing that new swipe attack. Tigrex also has an attack where he sweeps his tail around to catch players behind him. Sunbreak Tigrex gets a new attack where he jumps forward and flips over. From there he can combo into a charge, spin, or perform other attacks. He does not get back the swipe from Iceborne, so within Sunbreak, the flip is his only addition. Zinogre is a fanged wyvern introduced in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, being the flagship monster of that game. He is the first fanged wyvern in the entire series, and thus has many unique attacks at his disposal. He can headbutt you, he can twist to the side and launch himself at you, an attack known as the hip check. Zinogre can use his tail in a couple of attacks too. He can backflip, smacking you with the underside of it, and swing it around while spinning in the air. Zinogre also makes use of his paws when attacking, slamming them down on you twice in quick succession, and sometimes he will rear backwards and slam them both forwards. Zinogre can sometimes dive at the hunter too. Zinogre possesses thunder element powers, granted to him by small insects called Fulgurbugs. They charge him up, and he provides protection for them. Due to these Fulgurbugs, Zinogre has several thunder-based attacks, one of these being a projectile he can launch, which curves towards you. Zinogre's main gimmick is the ability to charge himself up over time with the help of the Fulgurbugs. While charging, Zinogre stays still, giving you the opportunity to attack and hopefully interrupt him. If he's interrupted, he will either attack you or immediately go back to charging, where you can stop him again. However, as much as you try and stop him from charging, he will inevitably reach the maximum. When that happens, several aspects of Zinogre change. Spikes on his back shoot up, his fur starts glowing along with other parts of his body, his claws stick out, and his moveset changes. His existing attacks are altered, his paw slams now deal Thunder Blight to the hunter, and he will sometimes perform a third slam. He will shoot his lightning projectiles twice now, and his hip check also gives you Thunder Blight. He will also chain certain attacks together. Zinogre can only become enraged when charged, but when he does, he becomes even stronger. Aside from his attacks hitting harder, he will also always perform 3 paw slams, and he gains new attacks too, such as his jump attack where he lands on his back. If you knock him down when enraged, upon getting up, he immediately performs a tail swing jump. One last addition is his ability to perform an attack where he summons the Foggerbugs, creating lightning bolts around him before unleashing it in close vicinity, known as the Thunder Call. Zinogre can be knocked out of his charge state, which also knocks him out of his rage state, and this is done randomly when flinching him or knocking him down. From there, he has to recharge from scratch. If he is exhausted, he cannot charge. When fully charged, Zinogre is immune to shock traps. Placing one down when he isn't charged will cause him to eat it, charging himself up in the process. One unique thing about Zinogre, at least until World, is that he can turn around to face you instantly. Every other monster turns in 60-degree angles, but because Zinogre turns so fast, it makes him a bit more dangerous and always keeps you on edge. Zinogre appears in the next installment, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, looking much more detailed than before. The fight is almost identical to the portable 3rd version, but he's much better at chaining attacks together, especially when he's fully charged and enraged. 3 Ultimate's G rank introduces the Stygian Zinogre. This is a Zinogre who lives in harsh environments like the tundra or volcano. While Zinogre uses Thunder element, Stygian uses Dragon, and as a result, his attacks have different properties, most notably his variation of the lightning projectiles. Stygian fires Dragon bolts, but they don't zoom in an arc, they stay in place before homing in on you after a short time, meaning you have to keep an eye on them to ensure you dodge at the right moment. Stygian will sometimes calmly strut around, summoning Dragon bolts. This is one of the ways he charges himself up, which means interrupting him is much harder. He also has some different combo paths. Both Zinogre and Stygian return for Monster Hunter 4. I mentioned how Zinogre would sort of chain attacks together in Portable 3rd and 3 Ultimate, but in this game, he fully combos them. The headbutt is now a combo opener. It knocks you onto the ground and Zinogre immediately prepares for his next attack. If you don't roll out fast enough, you will be hit by a paw slam combo or a tail flip. His paw slams gain a slight buff, where sometimes he will delay the second slam to charge it with more thunder. He can do this even if he isn't fully charged. However, if he charges a paw slam, he never follows it up with another. Stygian is also much better at comboing attacks, but he also has alternate combo paths, such as being able to dive and combo into a backflip. When enraged, he will combo this into a tailspin jump. Not only this, but he'll perform a tailspin jump after a backslam. In G rank, more of Zinogre's attacks will send out thunderbolts. When enraged, he will chain charged paw slams together, and when neutral, he can combo an uncharged paw slam after a charged one. G rank Stygian attacks much faster, and more of his attacks leave homing Dragon bolts behind. When enraged, he can Thunder Call to become supercharged for a brief period of time, where he becomes even stronger and faster with bigger Dragon bolts. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate features Apex Zinogre, one strong enough to overcome the Frenzy virus. This Zinogre has extremely tough body parts and is much faster than any other. One major difference is the lightning balls he sends out. Apexes are bright red and act a little bit like Stygians, slowly homing in on the player and stunning them upon impact. Zinogre reappears in Monster Hunter Generations, this time without Stygian. He is identical to how he was in 4 Ultimate. In this game, he has a new variation, the deviant Thunderlord Zinogre. Thunderlord is drastically different from regular Zinogre. He is bright green and yellow, and one of his horns is overgrown. He also has an extra claw on each of his paws. Thunderlord is permanently charged, which means that aside from pretty much every attack inflicting Thunderblight on you, he can become enraged whenever he wants, making him much more dangerous than regular Zinogre. His lightning projectiles arc in a different direction, so they always end up on the ground, and upon impact they remain there for a short time. He has access to Stygian Zinogre's combo paths, but also some completely new ones. Here he is extending his paw slam combo, performing the entire thing twice in a row seamlessly. He can also enter a new ubercharged state. His paw slams now cause lightning to strike down in the direction he slammed them in, posing danger to hunters out of his reach. Sometimes he will begin with a paw slam only to backflip, hitting the hunter with the underside of his tail and then jumping with another attack. And he will even do this as part of his paw slam combos too. His lightning balls go even further, and his thunder core attack has an extremely wide range and is stronger than ever before, although it does make him lose the ubercharged states. In later Deviant quests, Thunderlord starts the fight ubercharged and has bigger explosions on his paw slams and a longer lasting thunder core. Zinogre skipped World but appeared in Iceborne. He received a big redesign in this game. Not only is he much bigger, his fur is shorter, and his body proportions have been altered. He also has a brand new roar and other sound effects. Zinogre's uncharged moveset is pretty similar to his Monster Hunter 4 version. He will try and charge himself up, often trying to combo you in between. He has a new attack where he spins in place, swinging his tail around. The biggest differences relate to his charged and enraged state. In Iceborne, Zinogre can become enraged even when uncharged, which is most likely a change made to prevent clutch claw abuse. He has a mini thunder core he can use to charge himself up with that has a shorter range. When Zinogre is fully charged or enters his rage state, he will flip backwards before roaring, and this time all his roars require earplugs to block. Zinogre has some new combos when charged. He will often dive at you, combo immediately into a hip check, and when enraged, he will combo that into a tailspin. He receives a new attack where he scrapes the floor and leaps up into the air, landing on a random party member. He does this twice in quick succession. Zinogre still has his paw slams, but if you flinch him while enraged, he has a random chance to counter with another paw slam combo, which can lead into other combos. As well as his classic lightning projectiles, he can also have them rotate around him. Stygian Zinogre made his return in the second title update. He gains many of Zinogre's changes but also keeps his own classic elements, such as summoning Dragon Bolts while charging, or the alternate combo paths. When charged up, several of his attacks leave Dragon Bolts behind. His Dragon Ball projectiles have changed slightly since they now move forward and summon bolts, rather than home in on the player like they used to. He gains a new combo opener, an attack where he spins in place. From there, he can initiate his backslam, where upon getting back on his feet, he does a tailspin, or skip the previous attack and just do a tailspin anyway. Stygian can initiate a combo where he roars, summons rotating Dragon Balls that summon bolts, scrapes the ground, and leaps at you twice, before dashing at you while twisting in the air, each attack leaving its own Dragon Bolt behind. Zinogre appears in Monster Hunter Rise, without Stygian. His Rise design looks more like his 4 Ultimate form, with a smaller body structure and longer fur. He also gets his old sound effects back. He fights quite like his 4 Ultimate form, attacking before initiating charges. There are some differences though. Lightning particles appear whenever Zinogre is about to start charging. This new telegraph is very important in this game because very often Zinogre will start charging out of combos or even interrupt his combos with charging before continuing them. When fully charged, he lacks some of the crazier attacks Iceborne Zinogre has, like the ground scrape jump or the rotating lightning balls, but he gains some new ones. If you're far away, he will often summon lightning that strikes in a row towards you. He has a brand new lightning uppercut that he will sometimes use after a paw slam, usually telegraphed by his previous attack releasing lightning particles. Zinogre can also perform a charged paw slam after a hip check. Zinogre receives a new variation, Apex Zinogre. No, not that Apex Zinogre, this Apex Zinogre. And despite having a similar calibration, that's not Thunderlord either. This is a Zinogre that survived the storm created by Wind Serpent Ibushi and became stronger as a result of it. Moveset wise, he bears similarity to Thunderlord. When you encounter him, he is already charged up. He can also perform Thunderlord's backflips, and his lightning balls also act like Thunderlord's. However, like other Zinogre variations, he has his own combo paths. After performing a headbutt, he can follow up with a charged paw slam. Apex Zinogre also possesses variations of existing Zinogre attacks. His lightning uppercut now sends rows of thunder striking out in a fork, and several other attacks also send out lightning bolts. When enraged, he gains new combos. He can now follow a lightning uppercut with a charged paw slam. After performing a backflip, he can delay his landing with a slam attack. He also has a particularly annoying attack where he creates lightning explosions and attacks twice in quick succession. Unlike Thunderlord Zinogre, Apex can be knocked out of his charged state. However, after some time he will start charging again and recover almost immediately. Sunbreak Zinogre now performs 3 slams by default. In addition to this, he has a new attack when he's fully charged up, where he performs 2 strong slams back to back in quick succession. If he's enraged, he will follow up with a lightning uppercut. Bulldrome was introduced in Monster Hunter 2. He is a fanged beast and heavily resembles a real-life boar, with large tusks, one of which outgrowing the other. He is the adult version of a small monster known as Bullfango. The main difference between the two are Bulldrome's large, asymmetrical tusks, his white fur, and overall larger size. Before we go over Bulldrome's moveset, let's discuss some facts. While Bulldrome is the adult form of Bullfango, he was actually added to Monster Hunter much later than them. They were in the first Monster Hunter game, and he was introduced in Monster Hunter DOS, along with monsters like Kushala and Rajang. Bullfango is actually in more games than the Bulldrome. In Monster Hunter 1, Bullfango were classified as herbivores. They were reclassified as fanged beast in the second generation with the introduction of that class of monster. Bulldrome charges. Bullfango does the same. Because there are usually multiple Bullfango in a single zone, this makes them tricky obstacles to deal with, especially when you're trying to take down something much bigger. After charging, they start preparing to charge again, slowly scraping the ground with their hooves before dashing at you. This is the entire fight. Bulldrome's charges are a lot more complicated. He has a slow charge where he turns around and prepares to take off, similar to what Bullfango can do. And he has a quick charge where he instantly turns around beforehand. Bulldrome does have an attack where he turns a bit quicker, smacking you with his tusks, but the hitbox is small and the attack connects only when you're essentially hugging him. Bulldrome and Bullfango were absent from Monster Hunter Tri. This game actually cut most of the monsters from previous games, opting for a mostly new cast of large and small monsters. Some of these monsters were very similar to monsters from previous generations. This includes Rathalos, who feel like the Monster Hunter Tri version of Bullfango. When they see you, they slowly prepare themselves before charging at you. While Bullfango and Bulldrome prefer impaling you with their tusks, Rathalos instead smack you with their hard heads. Both Bulldrome and Bullfango return from Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. Bullfango, while still as aggressive as they were previously, will now perform idle animations randomly after charging, which gives them time before they charge again. This makes them less annoying than they once were. In high rank, Bulldrome can perform a different charge, where he charges around in a circle before heading back towards you, and he can perform this attack several times. The build-up can be pretty small, which makes him much less predictable. In Freedom Unite, if you hit any part of Bulldrome's body with an impact weapon, he will take stun damage. As of Portable 3rd, you have to physically hit his head. While Bullfango were in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, Bulldrome was absent. Bullfango performed their idle animations much more consistently, as it was often random whenever they would do them in Portable 3rd. Both Bullfango and Bulldrome were absent from Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but they were back for Generations, and this one is very different. In previous games, if you moved ahead of where Bulldrome was aiming, you would not be hit by his charge attack. G-Rank Bulldrome will instantly adjust to wherever you are. That was Bulldrome's last appearance, and Bullfango didn't appear for World or Iceborne, but he did make a return for Rise. In this game, Bullfango can sometimes be found sleeping, and he will eventually wake up on his own. When facing you, Bullfango can initiate his charges twice in a row before huffing a bit. At times, he will walk up to you and swing his tusk around. He acts slightly like Bulldrome, but much slower and much less threatening. In Sunbreak, Bullfango is the same as he is in Rise. Nargacuga was introduced in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite as the flagship monster of the game. He is covered in black fur and has 2 sharp blades on his wings. He has a similar body structure to another flying wyvern, the Tigrex. While Tigrex likes to charge around and use brute force to attack you, Nargacuga moves swiftly and gracefully. Rather than charging, Narga will often pounce to close the distance between the two of you, swiping his wings as he does so, often performing the attack twice in a row. He can reposition himself around you by jumping to the side, and with the somewhat awkward camera controls of the PSP, he can often take you by surprise with another pounce attack. Sometimes, he will purposely create distance by leaping back. He also has a bite attack. Nargacuga's tail is fairly flexible, and he makes use of it when attacking. He will often swing it around, hitting hunters at his front and side. He can also slam it down in front of him, which deals heavy damage, and can even shoot spikes from it. When enraged, Narga will signify it by his eyes glowing, and leaping to the side with a roar. From there, his eyes leave red after trails and he becomes much more deadly. When pouncing, he takes less time to get ready, often immediately going for it. His pounce combos become more intricate. He will now pounce before jumping through the air, landing, and then performing a big leap attack. He can pounce twice during this combo, and initiate the pounce after other combos too. When leaping back, Narga has a chance to pounce forward immediately. His tail slam is much faster too. Because of these pounce combos and the way he can often mix and match how he uses them, Nargacuga is about as unpredictable as he is fast. The fight is won based on how fast you can react to his different attacks. Nargacuga skipped Monster Hunter Try, but made a reappearance in Portable 3rd. Aside from hitboxes being cleaned up a bit, he gains a new attack where he spins around, swinging his tail a complete 360 degrees. In this game, Narga has a subspecies, the green Nargacuga. This Narga has a different colour scheme, and when enraged, his eyes leave a slightly different coloured aftertrail. Green Narga's attacks are often performed much faster than regular Narga, as his pouncing stance takes much less time. When he hops to the side, he performs an additional hop. He can perform his tail slam twice in a row, and his spikes will stun you. Both Nargacugas are affected by the 3rd generation's new exhaust system, which causes them to lose control after hopping to the side, as well as making their attacks slower and more feeble. Both Narga and Green Narga return for 3 ultimate. In G rank, Nargacuga can follow a tail slam with a spin. Green Narga can extend his pounce combo with another before leaping. Nargacuga receives another variation in this game, the rare species Lucent Nargacuga. Lucent fights very similarly to Green Narga, but what sets him apart is his ability to turn invisible, which can be done when he jumps backwards or to the side. In addition to this, every single tail attack will now send deadly poison spikes flying in multiple directions. Fighting this Nargacuga is much harder than the others, because you cannot easily keep track of him when he's on the move, and players at all ranges have to be wary of his tail attacks. When enraged, however, his after trails can still be seen, which can make him easier to keep track of when invisible. Lucent Nargacuga can only be fought in the tower and at night, because the moonlight is what allows him to turn invisible. Nargacuga skipped Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but returned for Generations. The main difference between Narga and his previous iterations is that the Generations Ultimate G-Rank Nargacuga can perform a double tail spin and a double tail slam. Narga will also extend his pounce combos, often performing 2 pounces, jumping to the side, and repeating the combo up to 2 more times before ending it with a dive. The double tail slam was given to him because Green and Lucent Nargacuga are absent from this game. Instead, there is a new variation, the deviant Silverwind Nargacuga. Silverwind has white fur striped across his body, and his tail has spikes up all the time. What sets him apart from Nargacuga is that, like Lucent, all tail attacks will send out a projectile. In this case, it's a giant gale of wind that damages hunters. Previously, Nargacuga had one projectile, in the form of his tail spikes, but Silverwind can send the gale out from any tail attack in any direction he desires, and the result of this is that he will often stand far away from you and spam his new attacks. He can also hop twice in a row like Green Nargacuga, and perform certain combos, like being able to tail spin after a slam. His tail spike projectiles are different, in that they home in on the hunter from above. In later deviant quests, he can fire spikes in the air while jumping, and feints before spin attacking with a gale of wind. Nargacuga returned for the Monster Hunter World expansion. Iceborne Narga is quite a bit different from his older forms. Aside from looking very nice in HD, he is quite a bit slower than before, with several attacks being slower than in games like GU or 3U. Narga's tail spike volley is sped up however, and he sends out 2 swift volleys that can make you bleed. He doesn't chain pounce attacks together nearly as much as the GU version. Instead, Narga likes to reposition himself by swiftly running to the left or right of you. He gains a new attack where he runs forward and swings his body around. He gains another new attack where he jumps towards you and flips back, swinging his tail in front of him. He can also leap twice like Green Nargacuga and Silverwind. Narga later returned for Monster Hunter Rise. In this game, Nargacuga feels like a blend between his Iceborne and Generations Ultimate iterations. He has almost exactly the same attack combos from Generations, as well as the ability to double tailspin and slam when enraged. Narga will perform similar tail spike volleys to the Iceborne version, but they will no longer cause bleeding. Instead, they have a higher chance of knocking you out. When preparing to tail slam, Narga has a new tail where he slowly walks to the side before initiating the attack. If you played Iceborne, this will definitely catch you off guard, because Narga would only walk like this when he was about to leave the area. In Rise, it means he's preparing for this attack. In the older games, Nargacuga would usually perform a single tail slam in high rank and a double tail slam in G or master rank. But in Rise, he already does 2 slams, so how does Sunbreak spice it up? In master rank, he will perform a normal slam and then follow up with another at a different angle, which tracks you a lot more. He no longer performs his old walk to the side slam he did in Rise. Nargacuga also has an attack from Iceborne where he rushes forward and swings his tail around. Title Update 1 has Lucent Nargacuga return for the first time in a decade. Lucent has been massively upgraded with several new attacks and mechanics. He has Iceborne Narga's jump back and tail swing, and can slash his wing forward in a quick strike. Like in 3 Ultimate, Lucent will often go invisible in between attacks, making it difficult to track him. He has a new attack where he roars and then rapidly spins. He can also perform a faster version of the double pounce. In terms of his poisonous tail spikes, he will prepare them by whipping his tail behind him, and from there his tail attacks will launch them. He has 2 new attacks where he shoots them into the air and they land on the ground, creating a poisonous field. The first is in a line, forcing you to move as he combo swipes together, and the other is a ring that slowly expands. The poison tail spikes can be temporarily disabled by dealing enough damage to his tail. As the fight progresses, he gains the ability to combo into new additional tail slams, including Rise Nargacuga's old one, with much better tracking this time. He also has a special attack, where the music quietens, he jumps around for several seconds before performing a giant tail slam. He also generally attacks at a faster rate than before. Like in 3 Ultimate, Lucent Nargacuga is exclusively fought in the Forlorn Arena and only at night, as the moonlight is necessary for him to go invisible. He later received a hazard quest that changed up his moveset in a significant way. He attacks much faster and at a higher rate. His claw swipe is much faster than it used to be. His poison spikes now hit in a T-shape rather than a straight line. His poison rain also falls in a T-shape rather than a line as well. And his poison rings last much longer, which means he can attack while the 3rd ring is still falling. In his second phase, the super attack is now so much faster and he jumps around much more. And the actual tail slam is faster too. He can combo his back tail swing with a triple tail slam combo, which is also just something he does now. Diablos is a flying wyvern from the very first Monster Hunter game. His main characteristics are his 2 large horns and his large club-like tail. Diablos' main form of attack is charging, where he attempts to impale you with his horns. He can also swing his tail, either to his side or behind him, and can perform a hip check. Diablos rarely flies, instead he uses his wings to dig into the ground, where he will then attempt to attack you from below. In Monster Hunter G, he gains a subspecies, the Black Diablos. The main and from what I can tell only difference is that Black Diablos is slightly faster. It's worth mentioning that Black Diablos is a female Diablos. A cool trick you can do with Diablos is throwing a sonic bomb to get them out of the ground. From there, you can get some free attacks, although it doesn't work when they're enraged. We cannot talk about Diablos without mentioning another important monster, the Monoblos. Monoblos is a flying wyvern very similar to Diablos. The main difference is being a large singular horn rather than 2, and a spiky mace-like tail. Monoblos was the final boss of the very first Monster Hunter game single player, and he can only be fought in single player in every game he appears in. Like Diablos, Monoblos likes to dig and charge, although when he charges, he will slightly adjust his direction to face you. Generally, they are pretty similar. Monoblos also gained a subspecies in Monster Hunter G, the white Monoblos. It fights almost identically, but it tends to charge faster when enraged. Diablos returned for the third generation of Monster Hunter, with an updated appearance, looking much bulkier. His existing attacks get better animations, and he gains entirely new attacks. He can swing his horns at you, simultaneously swinging his tail. Getting hit by either does heavy damage, and he will often do it twice in quick succession. He can also catapult himself out of the ground after digging. In Portable Third, he gains a new attack where he performs an uppercut with his horns. Black Diablos also returned for Portable Third. She fights pretty much identically, but has a higher chance of catapulting herself out from the ground. When enraged, her attacks become much faster than normal. Both of them appear in 3 Ultimate as well. For the first time ever, Diablos is absent from a Monster Hunter game with the release of Monster Hunter 4, due to the absence of a desert map. However, he returns for the expansion. In Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, Diablos is exclusive to G rank. He can no longer perform the horn uppercut or catapult attack from the 3rd generation, but he gains the ability to charge immediately after resurfacing from the ground. The reason he cannot perform some of his old attacks is because they are now exclusive to Black Diablos, in order to distinguish the two much better. Black Diablos is also exclusive to G rank, and a new addition she received is the ability to turn around charge after a catapult. Fightable in single player once again, Monoblos makes his return. His design has been updated similarly to Diablos's, where he looks much more bulky. Monoblos gains the ability to perform 2 horn uppercuts in quick succession, one after the other. White Monoblos also makes his return, also single player only. He receives the same changes as Monoblos, but he can perform faster uppercuts that are aimed, can chain charges together, and can perform a special charge attack where he places his wings on the ground before rapidly taking off. White Monoblos is G rank only, and after you beat his introduction quest, he can only be fought randomly on expeditions. Diablos can overcome Gormagala's virus and enter the Apex state, becoming Apex Diablos. When this happens, he gains both White Monoblos' uppercuts and Black Diablos' catapult attacks. Diablos skipped generations, which is weird because this game actually has a desert map, but he returned in Generations Ultimate. In this game, he gets back the attacks he lost in 4 Ultimate. Both Monoblos variations and Black Diablos are absent from this game. He does have a new variation however, the Deviant Bloodbath Diablos. Bloodbath is the second flagship monster of Generations Ultimate. He is a Diablos that survived a battle against hunters and became wounded. His horn was shattered and regrew messed up. His tail has also regrown awkwardly, and he is stained blue from the blood of the many foes he has slaughtered over the years. Bloodbath has his own exclusive theme, which makes him the first Diablos variation in the series to ever have one. He has several new attacks. He can twist around and slam his tail in front of him, launching rocks into the air. Arguably his most infamous attack is a new combo he has where he roars. After roaring, he immediately turns to face a random hunter before charging at them. If you are stunned by the roar, there is a high chance of you being hit by the attack. On higher level Deviant quests, this is pretty much a death sentence. Bloodbath cannot enrage until he reaches a certain health threshold. When he does, veins on his body start subtly glowing, and his attacks overall become faster, and he gains entirely new ones. He has a new attack where he can interrupt his charge to stop and stab you with his horns. Remember how I mentioned Bloodbath's backstory is that he survived a battle with hunters? Well, he actually learned from them too. For example, he knows that his roar can stun them, which is why he knows to charge immediately afterwards. This fake out charge is because he knows hunters will try and dodge or counter his charge preemptively. By stopping and stabbing, he can bypass their maneuvers and take them down anyway. Bloodbath will begin using a new dig attack where he charges before twisting into the ground, knocking you back. He resurfaces by catapulting. He can also swing his horns low, digging them into the ground. Bloodbath's final form is his Massacre state. When he enters a lower health threshold, his veins glow brightly, the music changes, and the fight becomes much more intense. Massacre mode Bloodbath usually begins with a charge, but when he twists into the ground, he emerges covered in steam, which will explode and deal damage at the end of combos. This is because Bloodbath's rage has become so intense that the dried blood is now evaporating from his body due to all the heat. Bloodbath will only use steam in certain charge combos, and upon unleashing it, he stalls for a bit to recover. He can now use his horn stabs independently and combo them into other attacks. His raw charge combo will now have him turn around into another charge, so good luck to whoever barely avoided the first one. In general, Bloodbath's attacks have much less downtime between them, so you have to stay extra vigilant to dodge them all. His deadliest attack, in my opinion, is a variation of his low horn swing. He charges up and then spins, swinging its horns and tail around and around. Dodging this attack is incredibly hard. If your weapon is unsheathed, you will probably be hit. Valor sheathing the attack will not protect you either, as it has multiple hits. In a previous evolution video, I discussed the Molten Tigrex. He would start off slow, using basic attacks before eventually using more and more as the fight goes on, becoming deadlier throughout the fight. Bloodbath Diablos is essentially an evolution of that idea, but executed in a much cooler way, with the phases directly tied to the amount of health he has, starting off slow before using more and more attacks the closer he is to death, eventually going into full Massacre mode, unleashing his full fury before he dies. He does not exit the Massacre phase or revert back to normal either, the only way to stop it is by killing him. In later Deviant quests, Bloodbath enters his Massacre state much earlier, making him even harder. Diablos and Black Diablos return for Monster Hunter World. Aside from looking very nice in HD, they have some key differences. Diablos has a new animation from when he emerges from the ground, jabbing his horns up before slowly digging the rest of his body out. It looks much more realistic than previous games where he'd kind of just pop out. Some of his attacks are much more telegraphed, like his charges or hip checks. Black Diablos once again takes exclusive ownership of the catapult attack and the horn uppercut, which is now telegraphed by her walking to the side a bit. She gains an attack reminiscent of White Monoblos. Her arms rest on the ground as she takes off. During this charge she can curve around, and if you are hit, it's an instant stun. In Iceborne, she has a new attack where she roars before charging and digging, and then repeating that several more times. Diablos returns for Monster Hunter Rise without Black. The result of this is that he gets the catapult attack back, as well as the horn uppercut. Man, it really feels like a custody battle between the two of them, doesn't it? Diablos also takes Bloodbath's rock launch attack, although he launches one rock rather than 3. In this game, Diablos has a new variation, the Apex Diablos. No, not that Apex Diablos, this Apex Diablos. Apex Diablos is a Diablos who survived the storms of Wind Serpent Ibushi and became stronger as a result. He is covered in scars and is a much darker colour. When he performs the rock launch attack, he launches 3 rocks like Bloodbath. He can perform a low horn swing, like Bloodbath. He can perform horn stabs, like Bloodbath. He can perform a twisting dig, like Bloodbath. He can roar into a charge. Okay, this is literally just Bloodbath. The best way to describe Apex Diablos is high rank Bloodbath without many of the things that make Bloodbath cool. The cool design, the cool backstory, the music, none of it is here. Apex Diablos is pretty much just a watered down version. He has most of other Bloodbath attacks too. He can perform the spin attack, the steam explosion, and he also has an enhanced rage state, although it's not tied to health thresholds anymore. He has a new attack similar to White Monoblos where he rests his wings, roars and takes off, turning around with other charges before ending with a spin attack. Sunbreak Diablos has Bloodbath's quick horn thrust, which he can do independently or as part of a charge. He can also perform a new, slower stab that goes directly in front of him and deals more damage. Rathian is a flying wyvern introduced in the very first Monster Hunter game. She is among the first monsters ever designed and can be seen on the series logo. She is green and the female counterpart of Rathalos. While he is known as the King of the Skies, Rathian is known as the Queen of the Land. In the first Monster Hunter games, she has a very land-based moveset. She can breathe fireballs, either as one or in a triple combo. She can also charge at the hunters. Rathian's most iconic attack is a backflip she can perform, either from the air or on the ground. If you are hit, it will poison you, and she often immediately performs it after other attacks, which can take you by surprise. When enraged, she can backflip twice in quick succession. She can also bite hunters. In Monster Hunter G, she gains a sub and rare species, the pink and gold Rathians respectively. The differences are somewhat minor. Aside from higher damage, pink Rathian is much more aggressive, attacking more frequently and punishing overly aggressive hunters. Gold Rathian is the same and has different weak points. In Monster Hunter 3, only Rathian made a return. She was one of 3 monsters from the previous games to appear in this game, with the others being Rathalos and Diablos. Like them, she received a redesign of sorts, with her overall body structure and design being altered. Her wings are larger, with a unique pattern on them, and her claws are different too. Her attacks have smoother animations and hitboxes. Her fireballs now set hunters on fire, which was not something that could happen in the older games. Her backflip is now extremely telegraphed, giving the player more warning as to when it will happen. Like in older games, she will backflip multiple times in a row, but in this game she can reposition herself to get a better aim at hunters. She can now charge 3 times in a row, turning to face the hunter in between them and ending the third charge with a bite attack. She has a new aerial attack shared with Rathalos, where she dives down towards hunters. Gold Rathian returned in Portable 3rd. The main differences she has include harder body parts, extremely powerful fireballs, and the ability to perform multiple backflips back to back. Pink Rathian made her return in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, with some very key differences to separate her from the base form. Whenever she performs her bite attack, flames spew out, which knocks hunters away. She receives a new backflip where she swings her tail in multiple directions. Green Rathian's backflip could be easily avoided by standing to the side, but Pink's is a lot trickier to dodge. Gold Rathian is also in 3 Ultimate and gains the backflip and the fire bites. All 3 Raths returned for Monster Hunter 4, but they didn't receive any major attacks until G rank. A somewhat major change is that Rathian does not perform the triple charge anymore. That attack becomes exclusive to Pink and Gold, further distinguishing them as tougher, more aggressive variations. In G rank, Rathian gains completely new attacks. One of them is the ability to sprint into a backflip, either as part of a charge or a fake stumble she can do. She can also chain a bite attack into a tailspin. Pink and Gold gain variations of these attacks. They can also run into altered backflips and can fire bite into tailspins. Rathian and Gold return for Monster Hunter Generations, with Pink nowhere to be seen. Rathian gains the triple charge combo as a result of this. While Pink is absent, there is a new variation, the deviant Dread Queen Rathian. Dread Queen is a larger Rathian with a purple tint, as if poison has infected her whole body. She has the ability to use her poisonous tail in new and unique ways. Almost every one of her tail attacks now deals poison damage, not just the backflips. She can swing her tail around in certain ways to leave poison spikes on the ground, creating a deadly area of effect. She can also perform Pink Rathian's alternate tail flip. In G rank, her poison becomes even deadlier, dealing heavy damage in a short period of time. Her venom cannot be negated by armor skills, which makes her even tougher. She can perform Pink Rathian's G rank attacks, as well as some alternative fiery explosions of her own. Rathian and Pink Rathian return for Monster Hunter World, looking very nice in HD and with some differences. Before performing a bite attack, she will try to run to the side of the hunter. She has some stronger fireball attacks too. By far the biggest change is that severing her tail now completely removes her ability to poison you, which is a fantastic change that was long overdue. Pink Rathian still has her altered tail flip, but she loses the fire bite. Instead, her bite attack combos into other bites, and often a fireball when enraged. Pink Rathian can also perform the triple charge attack, which is better telegraphed as her head turns to face the hunter before she initiates each charge. Gold Rathian returns for the expansion. In this game, she is the queen of backflips, performing both green and pinks back to back. She can also perform a new tail flip, where she swings it in front of her too. Her fireballs are just as potent, and like Silver Rathalos, she too can enter an enhanced state where her fire attacks are much stronger. She can perform a special combo where she bites twice, backflips, and then flies into the air before unleashing a great fireball. Like with Silver Rathalos, dealing enough damage knocks her out of the state. Rathian returns for Monster Hunter Rise, without gold or pink. She can now perform the triple charge, and her backflip was reverted so that it will always poison you, severed or not. She has a new variation in this game, the Apex Rathian. This is a Rathian that survived the storms of Wind Serpent Ibushi, becoming stronger as a result. She is now a dark shade of pink and is covered in scars. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush. If you've seen the other evolution videos, you know how this goes. This is literally just Red Queen again. Same gimmicks, same poison, same attacks, moving on. Oh wait, she can perform Pink Rathian's alternate backflip twice in a row. I don't think Red Queen ever did that. Yeah, I think that's about it. Sunbreak Rathian pretty much gets one brand new attack. She rears back before running forward and taking off into the air. From here she can either dive down on you or backflip, making for a very versatile attack. Reintroduced in Title Update 1 is Gold Rathian. Like Silver Rathalos, she is fought initially in the Forlorn Arena, but can later be encountered in the same places as Rathian. Gold has a few new attacks, such as a triple fireball, where she swings her tail around after the second shot, poisoning anyone who gets hit. She has Rathian's new run, which she can combo into her enhanced tail flips, but also an old attack from Dread Queen Rathian, where she flies down and swings her tail. Gold can also perform an older attack from 4 Ultimate Rathian, where she bites and swings her tail. In addition to all of this, she has a new combo in her incandescent state, where she splits a fireball, chains into an enhanced tail flip, before shooting a huge fireball that explodes. The Yian Kut-Ku is a bird wyvern from the very first Monster Hunter game. He is coloured pink with a large beak but overall small stature. He has a few attacks. He can spit fireballs, charge at you, bite, swing his tail around, and peck at you 3 times in quick succession. Sometimes he will leap backwards, exerting wind pressure on you. When enraged, he is capable of stronger fire attacks, where he dishes out multiple fireballs at once, as well as other attacks becoming stronger. Kut-Ku's flames are not very strong, so they don't go very far. In Monster Hunter G, he gains an alternate form, the blue Yian Kut-Ku. There aren't many differences compared to the regular Kut-Ku, but he does slightly more damage. These monsters were mostly beginner tier, being the first serious threats you face in the first Monster Hunter games. By the time you're done with the game, they're fairly easy to take down. This does not apply to the Yian Garuga. Yian Garuga was introduced in Monster Hunter Freedom. He resembles the Kut-Ku, but is bigger, purple, and much more fierce. He also has his own roar. Garuga has most of Kut-Ku's attacks, but curiously some of Rathian's too. He can shoot fireballs, either individually or part of a triple combo, and they're much stronger than the Kut-Ku's as well. He can perform a backflip with his tail, which can poison you if it connects, just like Rathian. Unlike Rathian however, getting hit by a side swing will also poison you. He can often do these tail flips instantly, or as part of a charge. Garuga's most iconic attack is probably his Beak Slam, which hits fairly hard. He can usually perform it twice in a row and can sometimes leap before doing the attack. Yian Garuga can also leap backwards, but he roars while doing so, which stuns the player twice. None of the Yian family appeared in the 3rd generation, but they all returned for Monster Hunter 4. They've all received some slight design adjustments, namely being more detailed and having one extra claw per leg. Unfortunately, all 3 monsters are exclusive to the Everwood in normal G-rank hunts, which makes it very annoying to capture footage for them. Luckily, they are all featured in event quests, but the downside is that Kut-Ku and his subspecies are very small. Kut-Ku retains all his attacks from the earlier games with smoother animations, but in G-rank he has the ability to dig up Khonchus from the ground and throw them at you, often multiple at once. The blue Kut-Ku does the same, but he also has the ability to perform a combo where he glides and kicks at the hunter twice in quick succession before performing a dive attack. Yian Garuga has become even crazier with age. He can now perform incredibly strong beak slams in quick succession. When leaping back and roaring, he will now sometimes follow up with a tail flip. He is extremely adept at combining attacks together, especially from charges, which makes him very difficult to deal with. It's worth mentioning that the blue Kut-Ku can also beak slam, although not as fast. They can all be affected by the exhaust system, which will cause their attacks to become more feeble, their fireballs to fail, and their beaks to be stuck in the ground after slamming them. Yian Kut-Ku and Garuga return for Generations Ultimate. While Kut-Ku is missing its subspecies, Garuga gains his own variation, the deviant Deadeye Yian Garuga. Deadeye is much smaller than his standard counterpart. One of his eyes is missing, and the other permanently glows. Deadeye now has the ability to use a heavily enhanced venom, capable of dealing massive damage, and cannot be negated by armor skills. His sideways tail swings will only deal the standard poison. He also gains new attacks, as well as slight variations of Garuga's. He can dash forward twice in a row. He can delay his beak slams, throwing off the timing of your dodges. Deadeye can also perform a special charge that is faster, but requires him to stay still and build up momentum. In G-rank, he can follow up his beak slams by digging up rocks from the ground and launching them in different directions. He can also hop back to better reposition himself for a beak slam. Now historically, Yian Garuga has always appeared in a Monster Hunter game alongside the Yian Kut-Ku, but this trend was broken with the return of Garuga in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Fightable in post-game, Garuga has received a few design changes, namely his wings being altered. He loses and gains attacks from his old iterations. For one, he can no longer scream and then backflip like in 4 Ultimate, but he can now perform aerial tail slams as well as huge dive bombs. He also gains the ability to perform powerful fireballs like Rathian and her variations. With his ability to chain attacks together better than ever before, Iceborne Yian Garuga is the most unpredictable he has ever been. But not nearly as unpredictable as Scarred Yian Garuga, who makes his official debut in Iceborne. Kind of. You see, Scarred Yian Garuga is a variant of Yian Garuga in Iceborne, but the very first Yian Garuga in Monster Hunter Freedom was actually scarred, as he was missing an ear and had a huge scar on his face. This makes him the original Garuga, or at least the first we've ever seen. The games have more or less treated Scarred and regular Garuga the same, and used either one indiscriminately. Monster Hunter 4 exclusively used Scarred Garuga, while in Generations he always appeared unscarred. In Iceborne, they finally made him a proper official variant, and he has proper differences from the base form. Although technically, Scarred is actually the base form and Garuga is actually the variant. It's a weird situation. In Iceborne, Scarred Garuga is always tempered, which is the game's enhanced monster state. This means he will always have increased damage compared to normal. In terms of moveset, he can chain aerial attacks together much more often. He also has a brand new attack where he sends a volley of fireballs down to the ground. Rajang was introduced in Monster Hunter 2, being one of 3 fanged beast monkeys, with the others being Kongolala and Blangonga. In terms of difficulty, the other 2 range from easy to medium, while Rajang has a reputation for being one of the hardest fights in the entire series. In Monster Hunter 2, he is no longer officially fightable, as he was only available online and cannot be accessed without hacking. Luckily, there aren't many notable differences between him in that game and Freedom Unite. Rajang has several strong attacks with surprising speed. He can punch left and right extremely fast while advancing on the hunter, ending the attack by slamming his fists into the ground, causing tremors. He can perform a separate slam attack with a heavy wind-up but even larger tremors. He can also rush hunters with a horn uppercut and spin on the ground, swinging his body. Rajang often repositions by hopping around, and each hop will actually deal damage if he comes into contact with you. Arguably, his most iconic attacks are his lightning-based ones. He can fire a lightning ball or a full-on lightning laser. Both attacks are quick to initiate, but if he misses you with the laser, it can make for a fantastic heal or attack opportunity. He can also leap into the air and shoot a lightning ball downwards. When enraged, Rajang's fur turns golden and he stands up and roars. The roar does not stun or damage you, but it does knock you back at close range. Rajang gains a few new attacks and his existing ones become stronger. He can now leap into the air and dive down, homing in on hunters while spinning through the air. Overall, his attacks are much faster and there's less wind-up, which makes him tougher to deal with. By breaking his tail, however, you can permanently stop him from entering this mode. Monster Hunter Freedom Unite introduces the Furious Rajang, a variant that is permanently golden and thus permanently enraged. Good luck trying to knock him out of it, as you cannot break Furious Rajang's tail because it is already broken. Not only is he much stronger, possessing all the traits of an already enraged Rajang, but Furious can enter his own rage state. When that happens, his fur stands up and electricity crackles around him. The damage of his attacks becomes heavily inflated, making him one of the toughest fights in the entire game. Despite this, both he and the normal Rajang have some weaknesses. Every attack has major downtime, allowing you to stop and heal, and they have major weak points all over their bodies. Rajang can kill you, but you can kill him just as easily, provided you can get around his swift and strong attacks. Rajang was absent from the 3rd generation, but made a return for Monster Hunter 4, gaining some new changes and reworks. He can now slightly adjust his fist slam, moving to the left or the right to try and get to you. He has a new pin attack where he grabs you and shakes you around, before tossing you away. In this game, he gains an attack that became fairly iconic for 4th generation players. He digs into the ground and picks up a giant rock. From there, he tosses it at you. The rock's size depends on the quest rank. In G rank, whenever he performs his spinning dive bomb, he will now bounce twice, homing in on you each time. Rajang gains a new ability in this game, Armor Mode. When enraged, his arms become red, increasing his attack power and deflecting all weapons, making it harder for hunters to attack. A special property of these charged arms is that if Rajang punches you and you fly into a wall, you are guaranteed to be stunned. When Rajang enters this rage mode, it will no longer knock you back, but entering the armor mode stuns you just like any roar. Rajang can only use the armor mode when enraged, but that means Furious Rajang, who also made his return, can use it whenever he wants. Furious is overall much faster in this game, especially when enraged. Rajang can be infected by the Frenzy virus and overcome it, becoming the Apex Rajang. In this state, the power and speed of his attacks heavily increase, and attacking anything but his head, arms or tail will cause your weapon to deflect unless you use a special item. He can become enraged even if his tail is broken. He has some new attacks, particularly rushing towards you with a pin attack or throwing extra large boulders. Rajang and Furious returned to Generations and Ultimate, and they were fairly unchanged in the expansion. In the base game, however, Rajang seemed to fight quite a bit differently, favouring hops to get around. Rajang was the first title update for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. He receives a redesign of sorts, with an altered face and different belly. He was fightable not only post-launch, but post-game too, so he was made to be harder than ever before. Monster Hunter World is a very different game. Hunters are much more mobile and have more options than ever at their disposal, so Rajang and Iceborne matches their speed. He is incredibly fast in this game. His attacks have very little downtime between them, and he gains new attacks to help close the distance between him and hunters. For example, he can leap forward with a punch, knocking you on the ground, leaving you at the mercy of his next attack. This attack is so fast that it can be hard to react to. He also cannot bounce multiple times like in full ultimate. Instead, he bounces a single time and then lands to face you. He also has a new pin attack where he shakes you around, throws you on the ground and winds up for a big punch. If you mash hard enough, you can break free to avoid it. Rajang's hit zones have become altered, so he does not take as much damage as before. Like the other games, he can become enraged, but severing his tail will no longer fully disable it. Dealing enough damage, however, will temporarily revert him to normal, but this can only be done when Rajang's arms are red, a state now officially known as the Rampage mode. When Rajang enters Rampage mode, he knocks you back, just like when he would enter Rage mode in the older games. In this state, he can perform a new attack where he punches the ground twice before initiating a third punch that tracks the hunter. He can no longer perform his rock launch. Instead, he lifts them up from the ground around him. He also has a finisher attack of sorts where he leaps into the air before slamming his fist into the ground, dealing tremors and heavy damage to anyone caught in the vicinity. Rajang has specific ways of countering the hunter in Iceborne. If you knock him down and he is close to a wall, he will grab onto you and rebound, denying you the knockdown and continuing the fight. Canonically, his head is far too small for the clutch claw to latch onto, and so you cannot tenderize it. You can still perform flinch shots by grabbing onto his arms, but be careful, because if Rajang initiates his rapid punch flurry while you're latched on, he will instead grab you and pin you down. These changes make Rajang incredibly hard, and he hurts players who go in expecting a standard fight. So when Furious Rajang was added in a later update, he really took things to the next level. Furious has all of Rajang's changes and is exclusive to event quests. While Rajang can shoot a single lightning ball at close range while leaping into the air, Furious can shoot multiple at long distance and they explode after landing. He can also perform a punching tumble that helps him reposition for another attack. When in Rampage mode, he has a new attack where he slams his fists down, sending lightning shooting through the ground and exploding. He also has two new pins. When in normal mode, he grabs the hunter, slams them into the ground a few times before leaping into the air and slamming them down. But in Rampage mode, he grabs the hunter, slams them a couple of times, lasers them, leaps into the air with them, slams them into the ground before unleashing a giant roar. Once again, his tail is already severed, so there is no way of knocking him out of his rage state. His Rampage mode can be cancelled, however, by dealing enough damage to his head, which when dealing with rampaging Furious Rajang is easier said than done. Rajang also has a different counter for when he is knocked down next to a wall. Instead of rebounding, he fires a sweeping laser. Regrettably, I couldn't get footage of this. Rajang returned for Monster Hunter Rise. Unlike Iceborne, Rise Rajang is in the game from the start, can be encountered relatively early in high rank as an invader, and of course is high rank exclusive. So naturally, he is not nearly as fast or hard as he was in Iceborne. Rise Rajang is missing the clutch claw and the wall knockdown counters. He has much more downtime in between each attack, and when he chains them together, he usually taunts right afterwards. He isn't nearly as fast as he is in Iceborne, but still has most of that version's attacks. His hit zones have been reverted, so they now take damage like in the older games. Sunbreak Rajang has some new additions. He tends to jump forward much more frequently than he used to. When lifting rocks when enraged, he combos into a Blanga ball. Furious Rajang returns, encountered beyond the final boss and in the game from the start, unlike in Iceborne, where he was an update monster. While he has a lot of attacks from his Iceborne version, he's still quite a bit different. He's a bit slower overall, although faster than Rise and Sunbreak Rajang. He can dig his fists into the ground and have lightning shock through. He can perform a much slower version of his spin that chains into the third punch of his triple punch combo. In his rampage state, that punch will have lightning shock through the ground, harming people at a distance. He will also perform the punch again after his triple punch combo, and he can even interrupt his flurry rush with it as well. He has a brand new attack, where he dashes at you extremely fast, twice in quick succession, and finally, he has the 4th gen rock throwback. In addition to this, his pin was altered so that instead of smacking you into the ground, he throws you into the air and attempts to laser you. Chameleos made his first appearance in Monster Hunter 2. He is an elder dragon and heavily resembles a real-life chameleon. He has the ability to turn invisible and inflict you with poison. When you see Chameleos for the first time, the thing that stands out immediately is his movement. He does not move like any other monster, or dragon for that matter, with his speed being slow, but also very inconsistently fast. His main attacks involve him spitting fluids, one being poison he can blast as an area of effect, and another that drains your stamina and can be fired either in singular blasts or as one continuous stream. He can also swing his tongue around, permanently stealing your items in the process. He also has other physical attacks, such as slowly swiping his front leg at the hunter or rushing at them. He can also bash his tail into the ground, hurting anyone behind him and knocking anyone away in front due to wind pressure. He can follow this up with a quick tongue attack. What makes Chameleos especially challenging is his ability to turn invisible. When you enter the same area he's in, he will often not reveal himself, and so you have to look for him. During combat, he flickers from fully invisible to semi-transparent. He cannot be fully invisible during an attack. Something curious about Chameleos is that when he's not enraged, his music doesn't play at all. It's just total silence until he becomes enraged, which is when his theme kicks in. When that happens, Chameleos becomes faster and stronger. However, when enraged, his breath becomes visible, and you can see it even when he goes invisible or semi-transparent, which gives him away and lets you plan ahead. Throwing a sonic bomb at him can disable his invisibility for a while, and breaking his horns and tail can almost permanently disable it. When enraged, he has an attack where he conceals himself fully and attempts to ambush you from elsewhere. He does this by flying around. Chameleos skipped Monster Hunter 3 and Monster Hunter 4, while his fellow Elder Dragons from Monster Hunter 2, Kushala Daora and Teostra, were present in that game. The three dragons are significant because they are all designed to counter each other. Chameleos' weapons deal poison damage, and poison weakens Kushala's wind powers. Kushala weapons deal ice damage, which Teostra is weak to, and he himself deals fire and blast damage, which destroys Chameleos. This is reflected in their armour as well, where each set is designed to shred their respective monster, which makes for a rock paper scissors dynamic. Chameleos returned for Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, reuniting the Elder Dragon trio once again. He himself has several reworks. His battle theme now plays all the time, as opposed to playing exclusively when enraged. To signify his rage in this game, Chameleos now breathes fog into the air, adding new atmosphere to the fight and somewhat obscuring your vision. His invisibility has been reworked slightly. He will only fight purely visible and perform his conceal attack when enraged. He can no longer shoot stamina draining fluids. His poison now leaves misty clouds behind, and he can use his wings to manipulate them in different directions. He can now rush forward, swinging his tongue around as he approaches. He has another brand new attack where he sprays extremely potent poison in wild directions. This attack can be difficult to dodge and it hits fairly hard. Chameleos appeared in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, but skipped World and Iceborne completely. But eventually, he came back for Monster Hunter Rise's first title update, along with Kushala and Teostra, receiving further reworks. Chameleos can no longer steal items, but if you have collected spirit birds, then he will steal their buffs from you instead. This can be used to buff his attack or defense, but if you hit his head enough times, you can regain your buffs. It is also worth mentioning that while he has your spirit bird buffs, the effect is present around his mouth, even when invisible, which gives his position away. Speaking of which, like in Freedom Unite, he can often turn translucent during attacks, but never fully invisible. He can still perform his conceal attack, but his semi-transparency makes him easier to see. He now uses enhanced poison initially seen in Monster Hunter Generations, which cannot be prevented by traditional armor skills and deals more damage than normal. Some poison breath attacks have been buffed, such as his continuous breath extending across the ground. Chameleos gains entirely new attacks too. He can now dive like his fellow Elder Dragons, he can swing his horns around while semi-transparent, which he does twice when enraged, and he can perform a giant body slam. If you dodge the attack, then you can take advantage of the big opening, but if you yourself were hit, then you will be unable to wirefall, meaning you miss the attack opportunity. Chameleos has a new tail for his big area of effect poison cloud, where he tippy taps his legs like a puppy before spreading the poison. Unlike the older games where it would be a giant poison cloud, Rise Chameleos spreads it more like a ring, allowing you to jump over with wire bugs. His big poison breath attack has two new variations, a short version and a long version, where he spits out individual poison blobs while aiming the breath attack directly at you. Sunbreak Chameleos can now breathe venomous lasers. He will often fire one straight ahead, and then follow it up with a sweep. He can also individually sweep a laser and turn to face you simultaneously, which he then combos with a straight tongue attack. Risen Chameleos was added in Title Update 2. He is darker in colour with scars across his body, and he has many new attacks. He can now fire two quick bursts of venom, one after the other, and both with heavy tracking. He can swing his tongue around from one side to the other. Risen Chameleos has access to most of Chameleos' attacks, but when he goes invisible, he tends to move around much faster. Eventually, he will enter his risen state, where the scars on his body will glow orange, the mist he sprays is pink, and he gains access to even more attacks. He can now perform his ultimate venom attack with even more venom globs and a longer range laser, and follow it all up with a massive venom cloud. His old venom ring is initiated much faster, only this time it's not a ring, but venomous projectiles travelling across the ground. His tongue attack is different because now he swings it both ways. Finally, he can create a cloud of venom before exploding it with a slap of his tail. Dealing enough damage will knock him out of the risen state, but he will eventually enter it again. At a high enough anomaly level, an enhanced Risen Chameleos is unlocked. The main difference is that he uses risen attacks when out of the risen state, including the poison ring. In the risen state, he starts comboing more attacks together that he didn't before. This includes swiping his horn left and right and into a body slam, spitting out two globs into a laser sweep, comboing 3 shotgun blasts, comboing 2 shotgun blasts into a body slam, and spreading a row of poison into a ring attack. I don't believe he has anything new, but his existing attacks send out more globs than normal. Chameleos can steal your items, but there has always been a sense of vagueness and uncertainty among the Monster Hunter community as to what exactly he can steal. He can take your potions, antidotes and stakes, but some say he can also steal monster materials, such as gems, scales or mantles. Some even say he can steal power and armor charms. I decided to put this to the test in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite as well as Generations Ultimate. I placed a bunch of random items in my inventory. Potions, a Farcaster, a Power Talon and armor charm. I then placed materials such as honey and garbage obtained from unsuccessful combinations. I also placed some Fatalis Evil Eyes and armor spheres. In Generations Ultimate, I placed random consumables as well as other items. In Freedom Unite, Chameleos stole pretty much every consumable item. Potions, antidotes, and also max potions. He also stole the honey and the garbage. However, the armor charms, armor spheres, and monster materials all remained in my inventory. In Generations Ultimate, he would also steal items like hunter's drinks as well as gunpowder and smoke bombs. However, other things I left in my inventory remained untouched. This includes tranquilizers, book of combos, sword and shield oils, jewels for decorations, and armor stones. In Freedom Unite, he can only take items he can give to other hunters. This means potions, max potions, Farcasters and Catalysts, but not ancient potions. The general rule is, Chameleos can only steal consumables, but also materials below rarity 4. This means he cannot steal armor and power charms, and he has never been able to. In Generations Ultimate, while he can only take materials below rarity 4, he can take consumables of any rarity, including ancient potions. Curiously, this does not extend to the sword and shield oils, and I'm sure there's other exceptions too. So when fighting Chameleos, the rule is that he can only steal consumables and materials you would be able to give to other players. I hope that cleared things up. Kushala Daora is the flagship monster of Monster Hunter 2. He is an elder dragon with a metallic appearance and the ability to control the winds. In combat, Kushala can utilize this ability by surrounding himself with a wind barrier that pushes hunters away from his sides and deflects gunner bullets. He is capable of blasting wind from his mouth too, which makes him incredibly dangerous at both long and close range. Speaking of close range, Kushala has several physical attacks too. He can charge at the hunter and swing his claws around. His giant wings allow him to stay airborne and attack from there too. He can glide at the hunter, slam his claws down, and shoot wind blasts, both singular and continuous. While Kushala is incredibly powerful, he has some glaring weaknesses. Flash bombs can easily bring him down from the sky, and if you poison him, his wind barrier will be heavily reduced. I touched on this in the Chameleos video, but Chameleos' weapons and armor are the perfect counter to Kushala Daora, while he himself is the perfect counter to Teostra. The same way breaking Chameleos' horn inhibits his invisibility, breaking Kushala's horns will stop his wind barrier. Because his scales are metal, they rust over time and eventually peel off, revealing a new hide beneath them. But until that happens, Kushala is extra vulnerable and thus becomes much more aggressive. Meet the rusted Kushala Daora. This Kushala variant sports a reddish-brown appearance and tends to chain attacks together much more frequently than his standard counterpart. Both Kushala and his variant went on to skip the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter entirely, but he alone made his grand return in Monster Hunter 4. Aside from his attack animations being faster and overall smoother, he gains the ability to summon giant tornadoes that persist for a period of time. In G rank, he can also summon mini tornadoes that zip and zoom around the area, serving as persistent hazards. A change Kushala received in the 4th generation is the ability to summon Dragon Wind when enraged. Dragon Wind is black and will bypass any wind resistant skills hunters have equipped. However, breaking Kushala's horn or tail, or poisoning him, will prevent him from using it, only allowing him to use the regular wind. Rusted Kushala Daora returned for the expansion. In this game, he actually plays a major role in the story, serving as the main threat and final boss of the village quests. He is briefly fought and repelled in high rank, and battled for real in G rank. He has similar attacks to Kushala, but he is much faster when using physical attacks and when repositioning. He can chain bites together and has a much tougher hide. Kushala is also in Generations, where he is identical to his Monster Hunter 4 version. Rusted Kushala was absent from this game, and every entry onwards. As of this video, 4 Ultimate is his last appearance. Kushala Daora later made a return for World, looking lovely in HD, with several new readjustments. He is no longer weak to poison. To suppress his wind powers, you must use Elder Seal, a new property weapons can have. He can create huge tornadoes like in Monster Hunter 4, but in World and Iceborne, he can summon multiple, which heavily restricts the hunter's movements. They can either move around or stay in one place. One of his new ways of summoning them has him spread his wings and create one beneath him as he takes off into the air. In Iceborne, if these tornadoes collide, they can temporarily create an even larger one. As well as his old bite attacks, he can now fire short wind bursts directly in front of him and perform extended bite combos similar to Rusted Kushala. In the air, Kushala can sometimes perform aerial kicks. As part of an update, Kushala gains an Arch-Tempered form. This Kushala is shinier and will perform his aerial kicks much more frequently. He is also heavily resistant to flash bombs, which is something carried over to Master Rank Kushala. This means that both of Kushala's traditional weaknesses have been nerfed in this game in some fashion. World Kushala tends to stay in the air for longer periods of time, and combined with his tornadoes serving as constant hazards, it can make him a tricky opponent. It does not help that from this game onwards, you cannot suppress his wind powers by breaking his horns. Kushala Daora returned to Monster Hunter Rise in the very first title update. He has several new additions and changes. One of which is that he is now weak to poison again, and with Chameleos in the game, the rock paper scissors dynamic is back. His wind barrier is no longer nearly as persistent, now proccing every couple of seconds rather than all the time. His tornadoes too no longer persist for nearly as long as they did in World, but they tend to travel much further and faster, and he often summons multiple of them at once. When creating a large tornado beneath him, Kushala will attempt to suck you in before unleashing it. He has a new combo where he fires a wind blast that knocks you into the sky and then follows it up with another aimed blast, forcing you to wirefall in order to dodge it. Kushala in general seems to not only combo attacks together pretty fast, but unlike World Kushala, tends to spend lots of time on the ground. Many of his aerial attacks will now have him land, where he combos into ground attacks. Sometimes he performs ground attacks that combo into aerial attacks too, like this one here, where he slams his claws down, unleashing Dragon Blight on the player. This is a good opportunity to talk about Kushala and his elemental powers. In the older games, his physical attacks would be dragon element based. This was not immediately obvious, because elemental blights did not exist in those games. However, rather than dragon, Kushala's weapons dealt ice damage instead. This is because in snowy regions he could deal ice damage, but not anywhere else curiously. This also extends to 4 Ultimate, where he could only use ice in the frozen seaway. In this game, he couldn't use dragon element at all. In Monster Hunter World, he cannot appear in the Horsefrost Reach, and so he cannot use ice element in this game at all. In Monster Hunter Rise, he can inflict it in the Frost Islands, but not the Sandy Plains, and gains the ability to use dragon element with this one attack. This gives Kushala a way to counter players with poison weapons by stopping them using status attacks and thus suppressing his wind barrier. Sunbreak Kushala Daora only has 2 new attacks in Master Rank, one where he sweeps a beam of wind while in the air, and another where he shoots a ball of wind also while in the air. Risen Kushala was introduced in Title Update 3. Like Risen Chameleos, he is darker in colour and has visible scars. He can fire 2 tornadoes that move left and right while he follows up with a wind blast across the ground. He can perform 2 slams that cause silvery wind explosions and can even create a giant wind bomb beneath him, also with a silvery wind. When enraged, Risen Kushala gains access to even more attacks. Master Rank Kushala's wind beam sweep is now golden and creates explosions on the ground for added danger. Like Risen Chameleos, he still has access to many of the standard forms attacks, but he mixes in the new ones for more challenge. When he enters the Risen state, he gains even more attacks. One of them is a combo, where he slams into the ground before backing away with a giant wind bomb, where the silvery wind now appears to be golden. His 2 fist slams have even bigger explosions, and he follows up with yet another wind bomb. His suction tornado will now cause 4 golden cyclones to rotate around it, extending its radius and limiting your options for closing in. Like Risen Chameleos, Kushala will get knocked out of the Risen state if he takes too much damage. Risen Kushala also gets an enhanced quest where he gains new attacks and combos. He can now perform a new aerial kick when he zooms at you. His tornadoes will spread outwards, but unlike the standard quest, they will also begin to move in towards you. He tends to combo his smaller charged orb attack more often, and certain Risen attacks now have additional properties. For example, when entering the Risen state, his transition attack has tornadoes appear around him, and he'll charge the bigger orb from the air instead of the ground. Teostra was introduced in Monster Hunter 2. He is an elder dragon that resembles a chimera and has fiery abilities. He is known for being among the strongest monsters in the entire series. Teostra is very aggressive, often charging at hunters, swiping at them, or even diving at them. He also has other fire-based attacks, such as fire breath and the ability to create explosions. He does this by spreading powder around with his wings and then detonating them with his mouth. The explosions can either be close to him or at a longer distance. He can also swing his tail left and right. When enraged, his attacks become faster and his flamethrower becomes longer. Teostra has a passive ability similar to Kushala Daora's wind barrier. He expels extreme heat in an aura surrounding him, causing damage to anyone close to him and deflecting bullets. It can be negated by breaking his horns or tail. Now we cannot discuss Teostra without talking about Lunastra. Lunastra is the female counterpart to Teostra, like Rathalos and Rathian. She is blue and has a crown on her head. The main differences between the two are that Lunastra's attacks are more telegraphed, and she can perform a flying attack where she blasts fire downwards. She is only available in the village single player quests, meaning she doesn't have a G-rank version and cannot be fought with others. In general, she is way less relevant than her male counterpart, which is probably why he alone returned for Monster Hunter 4. In this game, Teostra received some reworks. In the past, his flame aura covered his whole body, but in this game it only covers his head. The flame aura disappears whenever Teostra becomes enraged too. You might think this would make him easier, but Teostra received new abilities to compensate. Blast Blight was introduced in Monster Hunter 3 with the introduction of Brachydios, and now Teostra can use it when enraged. He spreads explosive powder with his claws that inflicts Blast Blight when they come into contact with you. In addition to this, he can spread it with his tail. Instead of his flamethrower attack, he sends out 3 explosions followed by blast dust volleys instead. But the biggest addition Teostra receives is a supernova, which he performs exactly 100 seconds after becoming enraged. When this happens, he flies into the air and is engulfed in a huge explosion that does heavy damage to the hunter. Even if the hunter survives, they are guaranteed to be stunned. The supernova can be prevented by knocking him out of rage, which can be done by dealing enough damage to his head, knocking him down, or mounting him. In G-rank, Teostra gains the ability to create mini supernovas in front of him, as well as manually detonate any blast powder he spreads. He also appears in Generations Ultimate, where he is identical to his 4 Ultimate version. Teostra later returned for Monster Hunter World, and in this game he receives even more changes. In Monster Hunter 4, he would use fire-based attacks when neutral and begin incorporating blast powder when enraged. But World splits his fire and blast attacks into 2 distinct modes. In his fire mode, he will perform almost entirely fire attacks, and with blast mode, he will perform almost entirely explosion-based attacks. While fighting in these modes, Teostra can progress them into stronger states, where the attacks become more intense. His supernova has been changed, so that when he's in these enhanced states, he will perform it after doing 16 attacks. In the world, it's much slower and more telegraphed, giving players more of a chance to get away. After performing the Nova, he shifts to the other mode. Teostra's fire phase has him surround his entire body with a flame aura, and while you can no longer permanently suppress it by breaking his horns or tail, you can temporarily halt it by inflicting enough Elder Seal. He has a new attack where he can spread flames or blast powder at close range in front of him, as well as an attack where he dives at you from the sky, which are all attacks shared with Kushala Daora. Arch-Tempered Teostra was added in a later update. Aside from dealing more damage and being resistant to flash bombs, he has a new attack where he creates explosions beneath his wings. This attack was carried over to Master rank, where Teostra's blast phase has some changes, where he will often leave blast powder in the air that leaves very powerful explosions over time. In fire mode, Teostra can now aim his flamethrower downwards, causing fire to spread across the ground. In blast mode, he has an attack where he reverses, spreading blast powder in front of him before detonating it. Teostra has had a very interesting journey up until now. He started off as a fire dragon, later being reworked so that Blast became his main forte when enraged. Now in World, the Fire and Blast are balanced between him. Teostra is known as the Flame King Dragon, but that hasn't been his main forte for a while. Instead, that is now Lunastra's role. Making her return for the first time in over a decade, Lunastra was added to World in a title update, and many changes have been made to distinguish her from her male counterparts. 3 generations on from Freedom Unite, she is no longer simply a weaker Teostra. For one, she is much more aggressive. Elder dragons in World do not attack on sight and will often chill out while you're near them. Lunastra is one of the exceptions, immediately going after you. Like her male counterpart, she spreads powder around. Unlike Teostra, however, it cannot explode. Instead, when Lunastra sets it alight, it burns on the ground, serving as a hazard for hunters. The flames can be extinguished by using water elements. She is also very good at exerting wind pressure on hunters, knocking them down as she prepares for other attacks. Teostra will only use his tail attack when someone is behind him, but Lunastra will purposely face away from you in order to use her version, which spreads flames on the ground. She has a few new attacks of her own, such as being able to breathe fire around in angles 180 degrees and higher depending on the quest rank. She can also do this when airborne. One particular attack has her breathing fire and spreading flames on the ground in front of her while knocking hunters down with wind pressure. In master rank, she can spread a heat wave in front of her which does steady damage and knocks the hunter down. Throughout the fight, Lunastra will charge herself up. You can interrupt this charge by attacking her, although she will retaliate. Once she is charged all the way, she will be ready to perform her supernova. Hers is different to Teostra, and some have dubbed it the hypernova. Instead of a single explosion you can avoid, she sends out 2 heat waves that affect the entire area she is in, draining the health of hunters and knocking them back with wind pressure. While it's harder to avoid than the supernova, you can still heal through it. Arch-tempered Lunastra can spread more fire than normal and can charge up her hypernova much faster too. Monster Hunter World is the first game to allow Elder Dragons to interact with each other, and there are often different interactions between all sorts of different monsters, such as turf wars. Teostra and Lunastra will never attack each other. If you encounter the 2 of them, they will focus their entire attention on you. In addition to this, if they are both enraged and one is ready to perform their nova, the other can join them in a bond attack where they combine their super and hypernovas for an ultimate nova, where after a huge explosion, heat waves spread across the area. Both Teostra and Lunastra have a special area in the Elder's Recess that will only be available to access when they are present on the quest, and it's where they go to sleep when injured. Teostra returned for Monster Hunter Rise's first title update, but Lunastra didn't come with him. He keeps most of Iceborne Teostra's master rank attacks, such as the downwards flamethrower and the row of explosions, and he can casually leave behind blast powder that detonates on its own like Iceborne. Teostra will often spread blast powder while performing other attacks, and he will try and knock you into them. In general, he chains his attacks together much more frequently. His supernova once again operates on a timer like it did in 4 Ultimate, but it takes 120 seconds rather than 100. Moving on to Sunbreak Teostra, his standard form actually gets quite a few new upgrades. He gets a new triple combo where he swipes one way, swipes the other before ending with a spin. If he does the attack in blast mode, he creates explosions both at close range and at a distance. If performed in fire mode, he spreads flames. He can create an explosion near his face, creating cover as he jumps back and then leaps forward, and he gains a double charge, slightly reminiscent of his older days. Risen Teostra was added in Title Update 3. His mane is slightly bleached and he has scars on his body. He doesn't have too many differences in his normal state, aside from the spin attack, where he flies up while creating explosions around him before diving at you. In fire mode, he breathes fire instead and lands immediately. He also has access to a double flamethrower attack, similar to that of Kushala Daora. Eventually, he enters the Risen state, and not only do his scars glow, but so do his arms, being practically a flame. In the risen state, his explosions gain much more potency, and he attacks much faster. In fire mode, his flames are much stronger, and he can combo his circular flamethrower into an aerial fire kick before diving at you. His supernova is also enhanced, sending fire across the ground to catch anyone out of range. The enhanced Risen Teostra does a few extra combos, and his attacks have extra properties. The short of it is, when charging in fire mode, he leaves fire on either side. His row of explosions is now more of a V-shape, covering a wider area, and he can perform his ground-based nuke twice in a row. Fatalis is one of the first Elder Dragons and the final boss of the very first Monster Hunter game. Design wise, he is quite literally a traditional dragon, having 4 legs, 2 wings, as well as a long neck and tail. Fatalis being a stereotypical dragon might seem boring, but it actually makes him quite unique within the Monster Hunter universe, as most other monsters and Elder Dragons tend to be quite supernatural, with crazy abilities and design elements. This sets Fatalis apart as something different, something stronger. Before we get into his fight, we must discuss the circumstances behind it, especially for the earlier games. Fatalis was essentially a secret boss. He was never featured in any trailers, nor was he mentioned in any strategy guides. He didn't even have an official icon, and this went on for a very long time. This was supposed to encourage players to interact and share tactics with each other. In the first Monster Hunter game, Fatalis was online only, which means he cannot be fought in that game anymore officially. When the servers were up, he would be unlocked by completing every single online quest, as well as fulfilling other conditions. According to this GameFAQs guide written in the year 2005, some players speculated that 50 Rathalos and Rathian had to be hunted for his quest to appear. This was later believed to be false, and some said that the Elder Dragon Rajang needed to be defeated first. As said before, Fatalis was so elusive that people were debating and arguing the ways to unlock him, and in the end still weren't 100% sure. The guide came to the conclusion that 100 total wyverns had to be hunted in order for the quest to be unlocked, including Rathalos, Rathian, Gravios, Diablos, Plesioth, or Rajang. The guide also emphasised that offline kills do not count. There are 4 Fatalis quests, each of them taking place in the arena of Castle Shrade. Fatalis lives there, and it's the centre of a kingdom that he allegedly destroyed. Each quest is 15 minutes long, and the main differences between them are the availability of weapons within Castle Shrade. The first quest only gives you the ballistas, while the 4th also provides cannons, a gate that can inflict massive damage, as well as a Dragonator. You don't have to complete them all, or in any particular order. They simply determine what castle weaponry you have access to. Having access to the Dragonator and cannons can make it easier to take down Fatalis, while players who feel more confident can take the lowest fee quest and potentially get the job done while saving more money. You might be thinking, it's a 1000 zenny difference between quests 1 and 4. It's not that big of a difference, why not go for the biggest quest every time? Well, Monster Hunter for the PlayStation 2 was a very different game to what we know now. In recent games, we have things like automatic farms and item packs to give us zenny. But back then, resources were pretty scarce, and so paying for the most expensive Fatalis quest would only really be done if players felt they needed the extra weapons to defeat him. Anyway, each quest is 15 minutes. You might feel like it's not a lot of time, and you would be right, it's practically nothing. It is impossible to kill him with the amount of health he has. However, the objective of these quests isn't just to kill Fatalis, they also let you repel him. If you deal enough damage to him, he flies away, the quest counts as a success, and you get a few quest rewards. And when you do another Fatalis quest, he has the same amount of health as last time, and retains any part break damage. So the objective is to wear him down, repel and repel. After a few quests, you finally kill him and have access to 9 calves, which is a very high amount. The whole system of fighting a monster repeatedly to wear it down and kill it might be familiar to many of you, as the idea was incorporated into Monster Hunter World with Kolv Taroth and Safi Jiva. As for Fatalis, having multiple quests didn't return for future generations, and the repel system was last seen in games like Monster Hunter 4. While Elder Dragons could be repelled in that game, they didn't really have so much health that you couldn't beat them in one round. Monster Hunter Freedom does have multiple Fatalis quests, but they all have a 15-minute time limit, with Fatalis himself leaving at the 25-minute mark. Future games in the series give you at least 35 minutes. Displaying things related to the first game is pretty hard for me because the online servers have been shut down. But luckily, Fatalis is fightable in the Freedom games, so now we can finally discuss his moveset. Like most first generation monsters, it's incredibly basic. His grounded attacks have him either shoot a fireball, inch slightly forward, or slam his body down as he goes into all fours. From there he can either stand up, shoot more fireballs, or perform what is arguably his signature move, the snap and drag, where he bites and moves forward at the same time. The attack does massive damage on its own, but what is slightly funny is that his hitbox is active across his whole body. If you are touching the tip of his tail, it will be as if you were hit by the whole attack. Speaking of his tail, whenever Fatalis turns to face a hunter, it swings behind him and deals damage to anyone on his side or behind him. It cannot be severed and has a pretty hard hit zone. Fatalis will often take off into the air, shooting fireballs below. It's impossible to reach him with melee weapons, and this is where the ballistas come in, knocking him down to the ground when he's out of reach. Fatalis might have a basic moveset, but in the earlier games, so did we. Our movesets and options were also limited, and unlike us, Fatalis deals huge amounts of damage with every attack. So the fight is a huge endurance round between hunter and monster, with the multiple stages emphasizing this. In Monster Hunter G, Fatalis is joined by the very first variant in the series, the Crimson Fatalis. He has a red hue and an overgrown horn, and he lives deep in volcanic regions. Depending on what game you are playing, he will begin the fight by immediately dive bombing you, as seen with this cutscene. He mostly has the same attacks, but sometimes he will smack you with his front legs as well as dive at you from the ground. His signature move has him scream into the sky and summon meteors that deal heavy damage. Like Fatalis, he will fly into the sky to shoot fireballs, but Crimson can also dive down onto hunters, and this is indicated by meteors falling while he's flying. Crimson Fatalis later went on to be the final boss of Monster Hunter 2, where again he was online only and thus no longer accessible, which is why it's fortunate that he and regular Fatalis are in Freedom Unite. In Monster Hunter DOS, they are joined by yet another variant, which makes Fatalis the first and so far only monster to have two. Meet the White Fatalis. This variant has a beard, and instead of fire makes use of lightning attacks which he can fire from his mouth. White is implied to be an older Fatalis, and to set him apart from the other variants, he has his own unique theme. White Fatalis mostly has the same attacks as the other two, but his claw swipe is charged with lightning. Instead of meteors, White summons lightning bolts from the sky. When he becomes enraged, his chest begins crackling with energy and glowing, and his attacks deal even more damage. Like Crimson, he can dive bomb from the sky or the ground. When he's around 50% health, any part of his body that isn't a weak point becomes hard, causing weapons to bounce off or deal reduced damage, and this persists until he is close to death. None of the three dragons returned for Monster Hunter 3. Fatalis is known as the Black Dragon, but 3 introduced Elatrion, who is known as the Blazing Black Dragon. Like Fatalis, he was online only, not being featured in any marketing material, and was extremely powerful. However, we are not going to talk about Elatrion today. No, instead we will discuss another Black Dragon introduced in 3 Ultimate. Meet the Smelting Black Dragon, Miralis. He is essentially the stand-in for Fatalis this generation, having the same body structure and similar attacks. He is kind of like a distant cousin. However, he does have many differences from Fatalis. For one, he is much bigger, towering over us. Instead of wings, Miralis has 2 funnels that pour molten rock from them. Throughout the fight, they land on you similar to Crimson Fatalis' meteors and can cause heavy damage. They can also pour out from his neck and tail. Miralis lives in the Tainted Sea because he needs the ocean to cool him down in order to prevent overheating. This means that during battle, he will often move between the land and the ocean. His body is covered in magma boils that serve as weak points. Hit them hard enough and they eventually shatter, causing his body to dry out. When he's on land, standing up, we can only hit his stomach and his back leg boils, but when underwater, we can travel between different elevations to hit the boils on his upper body. Overall, he tends to be a much larger but slower Fatalis, who doesn't fly, and we can battle on the land or the sea, which, to be honest, makes him the perfect final boss for 3 Ultimate. In terms of moveset, he has many of Fatalis' old attacks. He can breathe fire, perform the snap and drag, expel molten rocks from his wings but also blast them into the sky, causing them to rain down like meteors similar to Crimson Fatalis. Many of the animations for Fatalis' old attacks have been smoothed out with Dire, looking much more natural this time. Dire has a new attack where he lifts his tail, slams it down and swings it around. Miralis is capable of charging a huge explosion that deals massive damage. When on all fours, he will often turn and reverse, and it allows you a chance to access his higher weak points while fighting on land. He also has an armor mode like White Fatalis that activates at half health and persists until he's almost dead. Dire has an ultimate attack where he curls up and charges. When he is ready, he unleashes a huge meteor shower, but you can prevent it by dealing enough damage, which causes him to fall to the ground. Because underwater combat is currently exclusive to Monster Hunter 3 and 3 Ultimate, Miralis hasn't returned, and it is uncertain whether we will ever see him again. Not to worry though, because Fatalis returned for Monster Hunter 4. As stated earlier in the video, many of the mechanics from the first game and Freedom are absent here, so it is pretty much a standard Elder fight in a special arena. You can repel him, but he doesn't have so much health that it's necessary to do so. Castle Shrade in this game has ballistas, a cannon, and a Dragonator. It's also fairly small compared to the earlier iteration. Fatalis keeps a lot of Miralis' attacks, particularly the tail sweep and the new animations. He can swipe his claw like his variants and perform some entirely new attacks. He can now spread a flammable powder that ignites after a second, and he has access to a flamethrower attack that he sweeps from right to left or vice versa, which he can perform while moving forwards or backwards. Fatalis flies much lower in this game, making it possible to hit his legs while you're on the ground, but because he can freely dive bomb, he's a bit trickier to deal with. Crimson Fatalis is also in the base game, being Event Quest exclusive. Again, he begins the fight by dive bombing immediately. His meteors tend to land much closer to his body, making them more of a hazard for players who fight close to him. He has most of Fatalis' new changes, but also bears similarities to Miralis, as he can also perform the huge explosion as well as his meteor charge. Crimson can also spread blast powder around similarly to Teostra. With the release of Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, several changes were made for G-Rank. Fatalis became Event Quest exclusive. During combat, he is much faster and gains Crimson's huge explosion, which he can now follow with a dive bomb. White Fatalis makes his return, being part of the game but being released post-launch in an event quest. Aside from receiving a graphical overhaul, he gains the changes of the other Fatalises with some new twists. The huge fire explosion and powder attack are now lightning based, and White isn't capable of performing the flamethrower attack. His armor mode now activates whenever he is enraged, making him harder to deal with. In addition to this, he has an ultimate attack where he flies towards the eclipse in the sky and summons a huge barrage of lightning that tracks each player and does heavy damage. From there he dive bombs from the sky. Visually, it's pretty spectacular. Crimson Fatalis is available to fight in the high rank village, marking the first time ever a Fatalis has ever been fightable in a single player quest. In G rank, he is available in the base game, but something is very different. Upon loading the quest, you are greeted to a new cutscene. G-Rank Crimson Fatalis is visually different, being much brighter with glowing claws, horns and spikes. Each step he takes spreads fire on the ground. He emanates so much heat that solar flares now dash across the arena, something that doesn't normally happen, and there is a heat haze covering the arena. For reasons unexplained, this Crimson Fatalis is very different to the high rank one. He has a different appearance, a unique theme, and many other changes that set him apart from both high rank and the other two Fatalis. He gains a brand new attack where he can send heat waves out with his wings that knock hunters over and deal steady damage, something similar to Iceborne Lunastra. If you are in contact with his feet when he moves, you are set on fire. G-Rank Crimson gives off so much heat that it causes his body to glow while also affecting the natural environment around him. But when enraged, he becomes even faster, deals even more damage, gets G-Rank Fatalis combos, and he gives off so much heat that his entire body glows. The Fatalis trio returned for the expansion of Monster Hunter Generations, being G-Rank exclusive and thus identical to their 4 Ultimate versions. The exception to this is Crimson Fatalis, who is instead the old high rank version with the standard Fatalis music. The Super one remains exclusive to 4 Ultimate. This Crimson, like the high rank one, is essentially a standard G-Rank Fatalis but with blast powder and the ability to summon meteors. White Fatalis received a name change, now being known as Old Fatalis, which again is further confirmation that he is an elderly version. This also marks the first time the trio can be fought on a home console since the release of Monster Hunter DOS. Fatalis skipped World but returned for Iceborne's very last update. Crimson and White didn't come with him, but regardless, this Fatalis probably received the most changes compared to any other returning monster in the entire series. Once again, let us discuss the circumstances behind the fight. For starters, Fatalis is no longer a secret. He has an icon, and there was a whole trailer dedicated to his addition. Him not being secret didn't start with Iceborne though. Black Dragons as a whole were officially revealed to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the series, with Fatalis being featured in this art with all the flagships at the time. Iceborne had a fairly big endgame at launch, which had players grind in the guiding lands for hours on end to augment their gear with special effects like lifesteal, as well as battle stronger and stronger monsters such as the Silver Rathalos or Ruin and Nargacugga. But then the title updates began. Rajang was the very first, and he was a huge difficulty spike. He was followed by Stygian Zinogre and Safi Jiva, who came with a whole new endgame of grinding random but very powerful weapons. Master rank Kolv Taroth came later with something similar. Due to the nature of title updates, each monster should not only provide challenge for the player, but they should make the fight worthwhile. Safi and Kolv were pretty difficult and came with pretty exceptionally strong gear. Furious Rajang and Raging Brachydios arrived later, adding even more challenge and some of the best blast weapons in the game. Later on, Elatrion was added, proving to be a massive wall for players for many reasons. So at this point, the vast majority of Iceborne players have done insane amounts of post-game grinding, both base game and update content, taking on harder and harder challenges and upgrading their gear to be insanely powerful. So whatever came next would not only have to withstand their gear, but also provide a challenge like nothing they've ever seen. Enter Fatalis, remade from the ground up to become one of the hardest fights in the entire series. He has received a slight redesign, with body proportions being altered, namely his wings being much larger. Castle Strayed returns, also remade. There are cannons and ballistas, with a roaming ballista and dragonator cut off by a barrier. The special assignment has you fight him alongside an NPC, and to beat him you must clear 25% of his health. This is merely a rappel, and the real quest comes right afterwards. From there you can SOS teammates. If you abandon the quest, then you will start from the beginning, but it will be a normal quest. The average monster health in Iceborne for a standard monster like Rathalos is 20,000. Elder dragons like Kushala have 25,000 and Lunastra has 30,000. Safi Jiva has 40, which is quite a lot, but Fatalis has a grand total of 57, and that is when you are playing solo. It is a higher number when you have friends with you. While you have 5 feints, you only have 30 minutes to kill him, and it has to be a kill, no repels like in the first game. One last thing is that Fatalis hits extremely hard. All his attacks deal heavy damage, and you need to be at your A game to beat him. Fatalis has all his attacks from the older games, but they have been massively sped up and chain into each other much more fluidly. Many of his old attacks have been reworked and have new variations. His old explosion sweep has him plant flames into the ground that explode after a delay. He can do this to his sides and in front of him at varying ranges. Fatalis can slam his body down, either on his own or in retaliation to an attack, and if you are hit, it sends you into a hard knockdown. After slamming his body down, Fatalis will spend an extended period of time on all fours, using different attacks such as his old sweeping flamethrower and the snap and drag, but also new attacks such as this rapid crawl. He shares some attacks with his standing mode such as the fireballs and delayed explosions, and like for ultimate, he can do a nuke attack. It once again does heavy damage, and the recoil is usually enough to make him stand on two legs again. It is worth mentioning, Fatalis can only be flint shot when on all fours. If you attempt to do it while he's standing, he simply goes down on all fours again, and his head doesn't take damage. When standing, Fatalis can use different kinds of flamethrower attacks. One he sweeps upwards that knocks you away, one he breathes around left and right to catch players away from him, and another he fires downwards after a delay. This specific one is very dangerous, as it doesn't knock you back but it hits you repeatedly, forcing you to get away to avoid massive damage. A major new addition Fatalis has received is this new breath attack that some have dubbed the Cone. He gets on all fours and blasts a cone of fire for multiple seconds. Like the other breath attack, it does steady damage and doesn't knock you back, so it's very easy to die to it. It can be blocked by physical objects as well as shielded weapons with guard up. This attack, while dangerous, does leave Fatalis' head very open, which will be important for later. But he also knows this, because once the attack is done, he drops a delayed fire explosion on the ground, hitting people who stayed there too long. When Fatalis is enraged, he can perform a longer ranged bite, and like in the older games, he will follow a nuke with a dive bomb. He can still swing his tail, but now he can aim it at hunters. After Fatalis is at 75% health, he roars and flies away before breathing flames into the arena. You need to take cover in the corner, as Fatalis unleashes a huge wave of stronger flames that instantly kill you and begin to melt the cover. When the flames clear, the music changes as you discover the barrier is gone, revealing the Dragonator and the roaming ballista. Welcome to phase 2. Fatalis will now begin to fly, mostly using fireballs and fire breath to attack from above. It's important to draw him back to the ground, and the best way to do that is either to use a smoke bomb so he lands to look for you, shoot some dragon pods which will make him try and dive bomb you, or use the roaming ballista for the same effects. Fatalis will generally start chaining attacks together at a faster rate, making him trickier to take advantage of. He gains a new delayed explosion that he uses in a single spot in front of him, which he can also do at close or long range. He can also launch fireballs with greater accuracy. Fatalis starts phase 2 airborne, but he can also take flight at random intervals from now on, using his different aerial attacks. At 50% health, he prepares for another flame barrage. This time, the way to avoid it is by running behind this gate and shutting it. In multiplayer, it's entirely possible to shut your friends out, leaving them to the mercy of the flames. If the full barrage hits you, everyone dies, so if somebody is taking too long, you will have to sacrifice them. The intensity is strong enough to melt the barrier down, so you can't rely on it for when he unleashes the next one, but that is the least of your worries. Why? Because at 50% health, Fatalis enters a new state. Do you remember Silver Rathalos and Gold Rathian's enhanced fire? Fatalis has it too, and every single fire attack deals more damage and has bigger explosions, practically a one-shot. He won't leave this fire state on his own, and winning the fight like this is close to impossible. Now here's the thing, it can be prevented, and if triggered, stopped. Breaking his horn once reduces its intensity, and breaking the second reduces it again to normal levels. If you haven't been trying to break his horns the whole fight, it's time to abandon quest. From the very beginning, the goal of every player hoping to beat Iceborne Fatalis should be to break the horns. It's your only hope of surviving after halfway. Once you find out about this, it changes the entire dynamic of the fight. Not only are you racing the 30-minute clock, but every single blow you land on Fatalis that isn't his head is a race against yourself, since you're advancing him towards a state where the odds are too stacked in his favour. You need to be hitting his head at every moment it's available. Every time Fatalis is on all fours, it's an opportunity to strike his head. Every second he is flying is another second wasted. You have to tenderize the head, and then find opportunities to deal the most damage you can, and the best one people have identified is the cone attack. Pretty much every weapon has an opportunity to inflict their highest damaging attacks or combos, and if you can bait it out by standing in front of him, you'll have it broken in no time. Now even if you've broken the horns, you still have to buckle down, because the fight is still harder than phase 2 at this point. Fatalis gains a pin attack where he quickly rushes up to you. From there, you get stuck to his chest, which is now extremely hot, causing you to stick to it. Eventually he notices, and throws you off. This pin is particularly insidious, because he flaps his wings beforehand, making you think he's going to fly, but instead he tries to pull a fast one on you. He gains several brand new fire attacks. He will now perform 2 breath sweeps to each side, one after the other, as well as an extremely deadly 360-degree sweep that goes all the way around. There is no way to move past it. I believe it also hits multiple times, so if you somehow tank it with a mantle or counter, you'll still be hit. Fatalis can also use this in retaliation to an attack. Sometime during phase 3, the Dragonator becomes available. Hit Fatalis with it and you'll do heavy damage and trigger a music change. He no longer follows his nukes with a dive bomb. Instead, he will follow it up with multiple nukes in different directions. And it's worth mentioning that at this point in the fight, every single fire-based attack will leave fire burning on the ground, dealing slight damage as you walk over it. Fatalis will proceed to perform 3 more flame barrages at different intervals, 25%, 10% and 5% health respectively. There's nowhere to hide, so this time you must rush to wherever Fatalis is hovering and stand beneath him. Keep surviving all his attacks, deal enough damage, and eventually you'll see victory. So that was volume 1 of the Evolution series. At some point, I'll put out volume 2, and later volume 3, when those episodes are complete, and then it will be finished. No more episodes for a very long time. I hope you all enjoyed this collection of videos. It took a surprising amount of effort, editing the title cards to actually have episode numbers, as well as inserting the Sunbreak changes, not to mention the audio balancing. I think future volumes won't be as hard to do. Since you've gotten this far, I might as well share some future Evolution video plans. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day.